Hello there. You're a feisty little one. Fit him with a restraining bolt.
15 months. Oh. My. Time flies when you're having fun. That's a serve, that's a serve.
Alright, my friends, it is Wednesday, and you know what that means? It's story time, and I don't know about you, but I am super excited to be starting Steps into the Past, because it's been a long time coming. But before we do that, I am going to show you guys some things that I acquired. I don't know if this will work, but we're gonna try. Alright, so I got several books from Amazon about world building and writing. This one in particular is about world building for writers. It's by H.C. Harrington. So it's the complete handbook from constructed languages to mythical realms. And then I have this one, which looks really interesting. It's the Art of Language Invention by David J. Peterson. From horse lords to dark elves to sandworms, the words behind world building. And then I have the language construction kit, which looks like this, which was actually recommended to me by a couple of websites I've been checking out, and advanced language construction, which looks like this, both by Mark Rosenfelder. If you don't know why I have grabbed all of these, I'm going to tell you. So I have picked all of these up because I am working on a constructed language, otherwise known as a conlang in the writer's parlance, which is a language that is made up. Like Klingon, like the languages from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series, and any other, slew of other languages that are created for books, for TV shows, for games, things like that. I mean, Arabesh is a conlang. Mandoa is a conlang. Really. Think about it. So I am really serious about making a conlang to the point that I actually want to make an alphabet for it. I already have some words that are in use in some of the stories and some various terms. So here we go. Decided not to put that where they were because that's probably not a good idea. So that is my 5 minutes of being a complete lore gremlin. You're welcome. Also, Ajao, thank you so much for your 15 months of subscription. Never required or necessary, but much appreciated nonetheless. So welcome back to the archives. Alright. So I am going to try once again to use the prompter to see if it behaves itself. And if not, I do have a backup of the actual document itself. So we're gonna try this. Alright. Why do I suddenly need water? I've been drinking water all afternoon. Okay. So we are beginning our read-through of Steps into the Past with chapters 1 through 3. These chapters are somewhere between, I'd say, 15 to 23 pages per chapter. So we'll see how far we get, hoping we can actually make it to the end of chapter 3. I may swap from using the prompter to actually reading from the Google Doc, just because transferring it into the prompter is a bit time-consuming to keep the spacing. So, that's the thing. So we're gonna try and see how it goes with chapter 1. Actually, turn it just a little bit. Chapter 1. Between Shadows and Morning. Echoes before the day. The mountain woke slowly, as if reluctant to shed the night. Mist lay thick across the valley floor, a pale veil clinging to the dark forest below, its edges curling and drifting like breath from some vast sleeping beast. The spires of pine and stone stood unmoving beneath it, solemn sentinels guarding the northern approach. Thin fingers of sunlight speared through the breaks in the cloud bank, setting the frost-tipped ridges aglow in brief flashes of amber and gold before the light retreated again, leaving a chill hush in its wake. The wind shifted, carrying scents of cedar sap, damp earth, and the sharp bite of early winter frost. Somewhere, far down the slope, a bird gave a tentative cry, testing the day's beginning. Marin sat cross-legged on the narrow balcony, her spine straight but her shoulders loose, her gaze fixed on nothing and everything at once. The mountain stretched endlessly before her, but her focus wasn't on the view. Not really. Her breath misted faintly in the cold, rising and vanishing before the sun could catch it. Inside, past the open doorway, her armor sat quietly on its rack, steel and black plates newly repainted, sealed and polished until they reflected slivers of morning light. Beside it, her white-bladed lightsaber rested in the alcove in the shrine, a place meant for remembrance and promises yet unspoken. She wasn't wearing either, just the soft, threadbare flight suit she'd pulled on before dawn, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, faint streaks of dried paint still marking her wrists and forearms like ghosted sigils of the life she was still piecing back together. Give me just a moment, guys. Slow that down just a bit. There we go. It had been nearly a month since Korriban. The wounds from the clearing had closed, but they hadn't vanished. Some she carried in her stride, a faint limp that had lingered no matter how many stretches Callista had coaxed her through, or the instructions her grandfather had given. Others sat deeper, quiet bruises under the ribs, or the bone-deep ache that came in the still hours of night when the weight of what had been done, what she had done, settled like cold iron over her chest. Sleep rarely found her, and when it did, it never stayed long. But for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't press down on her like a weight she couldn't lift. It just was. So turn it down just a little bit, because it's spiking on my end. Yeah. Just trying to make sure that you guys can hear me as well, because the music to me was getting kind of loud. The door behind her opened with a soft, reluctant creak, as though careful not to disturb what fragile peace had settled. She didn't turn, but she didn't flinch either. The man who stepped onto the balcony moved with the steady patience of someone who had spent years reading a battlefield before crossing it. Thank you. My mod's looking out for me. I promise I was actually drinking water. Thank you, Wraith. I appreciate you. Alrighty. Wow. I wasn't even on the phone all day at work, so why am I suddenly losing my voice? I don't know. Okay? My voice does weird things. It is actually water, okay? I can promise you that it is. There is nothing else added, not even flavor, okay? I could add flavor, but I just didn't feel like it. I decided plain water was actually probably better for me anyway. Alright. Ethan's boots scuffed lightly against the stone as he came forward, a mug in each hand, the rich scent of bee-hut cutting through the chill. Without a word, he held one out over her shoulder. She took it, fingers brushing his for a fraction of a heartbeat, and then wrapped her hands around the warmth and brought it to her lips. The first sip scalded slightly, grounding her. Too early to be dramatic, she murmured, her voice dry, roughened by fatigue. That's why I brought bee-hut, Ethan replied, lowering himself onto the stone railing beside her. His voice was even, a low rasp smoothed by years of command, quiet enough not to disturb the dawn. I figured it might soften the blow. She side-eyed him over the rim of her mug, wary. What blow? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the question hang there between them. A thread neither chose to pull. The stillness stretched out like fabric, thin but unbroken, a silence neither of them felt the need to fill. Sorry, I'm going to actually speed that up a little bit. Finally, Ethan said. Connor signed off 2 days ago. Stefan backed it. Kalen and Greer have been holding the roster space for months. Marin blinked once, a faint furrow forming between her eyebrows. Holding it for whom? Ethan sipped from his mug, his gaze fixed on the ridgeline ahead. You. She turned fully towards him, confusion shadowed by caution, her eyes, a piercing, weathered blue, narrowed slightly. You're sending me out? No one's sending you anywhere, he said evenly, his tone calm but anchored, as if planting each word in the crevices of the stone where it couldn't be moved. We're offering you something. Something real. Something that matters. She studied him for a long moment, unreadable, weighing truth against memory and all the ghosts of being told who she was supposed to be. An exchange program, Ethan continued. Joint operations with a northern battalion, the Katani Marines. You'd train with them, eat with them, fight beside them for a full cycle. No Jedi titles, no noble titles, no rank, just another VOD on the line. Her breath escaped slowly, misting between them before the chill morning breeze stole it away. Why me? Ethan turned to meet her gaze. Not as the man who'd pulled her from the crater on Galan, who'd carried her from the Dar Yame that was Bastine, nor as the teacher who had set a rifle in her hand and told her she'd live if she listened. Just as someone who knew her in ways few ever would. Because you fought for everyone else, Marin, he said, quiet but steady. For Renius, for Ariana, for Jarius, for what you thought you were meant to be. He tapped her mug lightly with his own, a soft grounding sound against the dawn. It's time you fight for you. She didn't reply. Not at first. The forest below was waking now, the mist thinning as sunlight stretched across the treetops. She sat there, Be hot cooling in her hands, breathing in the damp air, and feeling the faint pull in her thigh where old injuries still refused to forget. Finally, her voice came, softer than before. I left the saber behind. I know. And the armor. I know that too. Oops. Sorry. I'm actually gonna... One second. Being cranky. Give me just 1 second while I figure out where the heck I was. Oh, I clicked somewhere and it decided it didn't want to play. I'm letting it scroll to where I should be. Give me just a moment, my friends. I'm still learning how this thing works, so just bear with me a bit. Her eyes dropped to the mug, the thumb tracing the rim. I'm not sure I want them to see me that way. Not yet. Ethan gave a small, half smile that held no judgment. Then don't bring them. She glanced up, surprise flickering her expression. You show up in a flight suit or a training tunic, he said, his tone matter of fact as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Just like the others. No armor, no sigil, no expectations. Sorry. She hesitated, weighing that. I thought you were going to tell me to carry all of it. I am, Ethan said, and his voice was steady as the mountains themselves. But that doesn't mean you have to wear it. The sun broke over the eastern ridge at last, spilling molten gold across the balcony and cutting the morning chill in half. Marin squinted against the sudden light and then let her gaze soften. A long breath sliding out of her chest. Something loosened in her shoulders, just a fraction, like a knot beginning to uncoil. She nodded once. Not a vow, not a declaration, just acceptance. A choice made on her own terms. I'll go, she said quietly, but only if it's my choice. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. No wait, no conditions, just the truth. It always was. Silent bearings. August 5, Central Colony Square. The square was quieter than usual, settled under the weight of a long day and the soft hush that came before evening. The sky above Tanagas had turned into a wash of muted gold and lavender, clouds stretching in thin ribbons across the horizon. The kind of quiet that might have felt peaceful once, before Korriban, before Coruscant, before every scar that had changed how Marin carried herself. Now it felt heavier, like the silence had teeth. Give me 1 second, I'm actually gonna slow that down a bit. I'm still figuring out how fast to make this thing go. Okay. She sat on one of the old stone benches near the central fountain, her small duffel bag resting near her boots. Gloved hands folded on her knees. The fatigues felt strange, stiffer than her usual clothing, unfamiliar, almost as if they were borrowed. The uniform tugged at her shoulders in ways that Jedi robes never had. It somehow sat closer to her bones than either the tunics of the Praxium or the simple clothes she'd worn around the colony before. Her hair had been cut short enough to keep out of her eyes and tied into a no-nonsense knot at the nape of her neck. She looked every inch the recruit, but the force in her, the quiet, battered edge of it, felt anything but new. She'd been still for a long... Oops, sorry. Still going slightly too fast. Okay. She'd been still for a long while, letting the muted trickle of the fountain mask the churn of her thoughts, trying not to fidget with the tags hanging under her collar. Tomorrow she'd be gone, shipping to Catane, the moon where the marine bases sprawled like steel across gray rock. 6 months of training before assignment, a year before she was home again. It was supposed to mean something, this exchange program. Stefan had said as much. Ethan had said it would be good for her. Marin wasn't so sure. Aran almost passed her by without noticing. He'd been walking his usual route through the colony, scanning like he always did. Not for trouble this time, just out of habit. The clearing had carved caution into both of them. He'd been halfway past before his eyes caught on the uniform, on the posture of someone trying to hold steady under too much weight. He stopped short, turned, and looked again. Only then did it click. The Koigar, Marin, he greeted quietly as he approached, one brow raised. A ghost of a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth as he leaned an elbow against the back of the bench. Quite the intimidating look you've got going. Planning to scare someone off before you even leave? She started slightly, glancing up, and for a moment the walls around her presence dropped, just enough that he felt the faint hum of recognition in the force. Dulled, but still there. It was gone just as quickly, locked back behind her usual shields. Sita, she said softly, scooting over a little to make space beside her. No, just busy since we got back. His gaze flicked over the uniform again, lingering on the duffel at her feet. Aye, looks like you've been more than busy. What's this, then? Trading in sabers for a rifle? She managed a small shrug, her fingers worrying at the seam of her gloves. An exchange program, she said, after a moment, her voice quieter than normal. The Katani Marines. Master Card and Ethan said it might help. A different kind of training. Her eyes dropped to the ground, her words trailing off. I don't know if it's been done before. Aran's mouth quirked slightly, but his eyes stayed steady on her face. Learning to hit harder, fight smarter. Nothing wrong with that. Though I'll admit, I wasn't expecting to see you in greens this soon. Marin huffed a soft, humorless laugh, gaze still fixed on her boots. I leave in the morning. She paused and then continued more quietly. Part of me hopes it gives me something I'm missing. Part of me wonders if it's just another way to remind everyone whose daughter I am. He lifted his head slightly, watching her. The deflection didn't hide the knot of tension in her shoulders, the way her hands wouldn't quite still. Nothing wrong with following in your father's footsteps, he said, his voice low and careful. Doesn't mean you're living in his shadow. A faint, knowing smile tugged at his lips. And knowing you, you'll make them forget you're a Durza fast enough. She shook her head, glancing sideways at him. I don't want special treatment. Just feels strange, like I don't know where to put my feet anymore. She swallowed hard, the memory of Korriban still there in the silence between her words, in the way she kept glancing down at her hands as if they weren't steady enough to hold anything real. Aran was quiet for a long moment before easing down onto the bench beside her. He didn't reach out. Not yet. He just spoke in the same even tone that had steadied her before. Big changes will do that. New places, new faces, but you won't be alone. When she glanced up, he shrugged one shoulder. The Tawny Marines look after their own, and you've got people in this fight who won't be far, one way or another. Might not see them, but they're there. Something in her posture eased a fraction. Not much, but just enough. She looked away quickly, tugging absently at the cuff of her sleeve. It's just a lot, she admitted, so softly it was almost lost to the fountain's murmur. It feels like I've been moving from one battlefield to another since Galan, and this one's just a different terrain. Aran let that sit a moment before replying, his voice pitched low. Then take it like any other fight, Marin. One step, one day at a time. You'll find your footing. Finally, he rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, a firm squeeze, without ceremony, and I'd put credits on you planting a few Marines on their shebs before it's over. She blinked and glanced up at him, and despite herself, a small smile broke through. You think so? I know so, he said simply, his eyes steady on hers. You faced worse than a drill sergeant with lungs full of fire. You'll figure that out fast enough. For the first time in hours, the tension in her chest loosened enough for her to breathe without catching on her old wounds. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing against the tags beneath her collar. Maybe, she murmured. Just hope I can keep moving forward this time. You will, he said, firm but quiet, like a promise. Or a hat. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid lying between them. And then Marin drew in a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and finally looked toward the path leading home. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. The light was fading by the time Marin pushed herself to her feet, flinging the small duffel over one shoulder. The fatigue in her movements was subtle, but there, the kind that came from weeks of carrying more than just her own weight. I'm fine-tuning the speed. Sorry, guys. Aran rose beside her, his long stride easy but alert in the way a soldier's always was, scanning out of habit even here where the colony lights burned warm and safe. Speeder still where you left it? He asked, quietly as they crossed the square, his tone more conversational than curious. He already knew the answer. Things didn't tend to vanish in this place, but it gave her something simple to answer. She nodded once. Near the southern pad. Figured it was better than walking the ridge in these boots. Her voice was dry but soft. Her gaze flicked toward the tree line edging the colony, the dense green-black of Tanagas's southern forest stretching far beyond the clearing. Oops. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I totally didn't even see that. Are we back yet? I am so sorry. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry about that, my friends. I did not realize we were in an ad. If someone would be so kind as to tell me where I got so rudely cut off, that would be fantastic, and I will try to back up for you guys. Um, for some reason, I didn't actually catch that we had an ad. I usually get a little thing up here at the top of the chat that tells me that. So if someone could be amazing and tell me where it cut off, that would be fabulous. Alright, I am honestly not sure where it cut me off. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try and back up a little bit. Alright, my friends, I'm gonna back up to the top of that section. Just for continuity's sake, because I honestly don't know where it cut me off. Okay. The light was fading fast by the time Marin pushed herself to her feet, slinging the small duffel over one shoulder. The fatigue in her movements was subtle, but there, the kind that came from weeks of carrying more than just her own weight. Aran rose beside her, his long stride easy but alert in the way that a soldier's always was, scanning out of habit even here where the colony lights burned warm and safe. "Speeder still where you left it?" he asked, as quietly as they crossed the square. His tone was more conversational than curious. He already knew the answer. Things didn't tend to vanish in this place. But it gave her something simple to answer. She nodded once. Near the southern pad, figured it was better than walking the ridge in these boots. Her voice was dry but soft. Her eyes flicked toward the tree line edging the colony, the dense green-black of Snogus's southern forest stretching far beyond the clearing. The wild out here never quite stayed tame, even with the Marine's presence. Aran matched his pace to hers, unhurried. "Not the worst idea you've had," he replied mildly. "Be a long trek otherwise." A beat passed between them and his voice softened just enough to be heard over the hum of evening insects. "You sleeping at all tonight?" She huffed, one corner of her mouth quirking wryly without humor. "I'll try. It doesn't mean it'll work." He glanced sideways at her but didn't press, just shifted the subject with deliberate ease. "You've done harder things than this." A pause, his tone deliberate but low. "It doesn't mean you've got to do 'em alone." Marin said nothing for a while, just walked with him until the path came into view. The speeder parked at the edge where tree roots curled around Duracrete. At last, she exhaled slowly. "Feels like I do sometimes," she admitted under her breath, the kind of confession that wasn't meant to leave the space between them. All of it. Feels like I should know how to stand on my own by now." Aran stopped beside the speeder, waiting until she met his eyes. "Standing alone is overrated," he said quietly, with a rough honesty that cut deeper than any platitude. "Even the best warriors don't win every battle solo. Don't let anyone tell you different." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding, the tension in her shoulders easing by a thread. Without another word, she swung into the driver's seat, tossing the bag behind her. Aran rounded to the passenger side, climbing in with the same easy readiness of someone who'd spent his life on the move. The ride north was quiet. The forest stretched for kilometers, dark and heavy under the night sky, the speeder's running lights casting long slashes of silver along the path. Marin drove without speaking, focused on the ribbon of the path ahead, the engine's low growl a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. Occasionally, Ran would point out a hazard on the edge of the trail, a fallen branch, a slick patch from evening mist, but otherwise he let the silence stand, giving her space to breathe. It wasn't until the mountains began to rise in the distance, jagged and shadowed against the stars, But she spoke again, her voice low. Part of me doesn't want to go, she confessed. It feels like every time I leave, something breaks. Aran's answer was steady, his gaze on the tree line as it rushed past them. Then let this be the one time you leave and come back stronger. His tone carrying the weight of someone who knew too well what leaving often cost. Not every departure takes pieces with it. She didn't answer, but the way her hands settled more firmly on the controls said she'd heard him. By the time they reached the northern mountains, the estate lights glowed like quiet beacons through the trees. Marin parked the speeder just off the main path, the engine ticking as it cooled in the thin mountain air. Aran climbed out first, offered her an arm as she swung down out of the driver's seat. She took it briefly, steadying herself, the kind of gesture neither of them spoke about at this point. "You'll do fine," he told her once more, standing at the base of the steps. "It doesn't feel like it now, but you will." There was a pause, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Now, go say your goodbyes to the lad before he gets any ideas about tracking your shuttle on foot come morning." That drew a soft, real laugh from Marin, faint, but there, and she squeezed his forearm once in silent thanks before climbing the steps and slipping inside. Before the dawn. The house was quiet when Marin pushed the door closed behind her, the sound barely more than a sigh against the heavy stillness of the estate. Outside, the wind traced soft fingers through the mountain trees, and every now and then the old boards of the house creaked like a living thing. It was home, but tonight it felt strange, like it was a way station between everything she had endured and the unknown she was about to walk into. She froze when she saw him. Jared was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the foot of her bunk. His jacket shrugged off and tossed aside, his boots abandoned near the balcony doors. The dim glow of a single lamp threw long shadows across his face, deepening the angles of his jaw, but it did nothing to mask the worry in his eyes. He didn't move at first, as if he'd been holding himself perfectly still, waiting for her. "Took you long enough," he said quietly, not accusing, just a soft rasp of sound, meant to hide the fact he'd been waiting far longer than he should have had to. "I was starting to think you were going to skip saying goodbye altogether." Marin swallowed hard, letting her duffel slide from her shoulder to the floor with a muffled thump. Her fingers toyed with the edge of Jerry's tags at her collar, a nervous habit she hadn't outgrown, even now. "I wouldn't do that," she murmured, her voice rough from a day full of farewells and thoughts she couldn't shake. "Might have gotten lost for a minute, but I'd find my way back here eventually." Jared rose to his feet, moving with a quiet, deliberate grace she knew well, and stopped just in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, but not so close it forced the air from her lungs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of Korriban, the clearing of every unspoken word that had piled up between them since the day everything changed. "So," he said finally, his tone pitched low like he wasn't sure his voice would hold steady if he pushed harder. "Marines, huh?" He tried to shape it into a joke, a wry curve of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You could have picked something less likely to get you killed." Marin huffed a laugh that caught in her throat. "I didn't exactly pick it," she admitted, "but maybe that's why I have to do it. I keep thinking if I'd been stronger, faster, if I'd seen it coming." Her breath hitched, and she shook her head hard. "I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have watched Irenaeus dragged off. Maybe she'd still be alive." Jared's hands found her shoulders before the words had fully settled between them, warm and steady, grounding her in a way few things could. "No," he said, his voice firm but quiet, the way he spoke when he was trying to cut through the noise in her head. "That wasn't on you, Marin. We both know it. You did everything you could, more than most would have. You walked out of that hell alive, and you've been carrying the rest of us on your back since." He squeezed lightly, making sure she heard every word. "You don't owe anyone more than that." She blinked hard, but the tears didn't fall. They never did. Not anymore. Instead, she reached up, gripping his wrist as if to hold on to the only thing keeping her upright. "It feels like I do," she whispered. "Feels like if I don't, it all happens again." His expression softened. The I didn't. Oh, sorry. 1 second. Backing up a little bit. Backing up just a smidge. Um. His expression softened, the fight and his stance shifting to quiet resolve. "Then go," he said, leaning in just enough that his forehead almost touched hers. "Learn whatever you think you need to. Hit harder, stand taller." "But when you come back, and you will come back, remember this. You're not alone. Not now, not then, not ever." The words had weight, a vow carved from something older than either of them knew how to name. Her breath stuttered, a shiver running through her that wasn't from the mountain cold. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting that truth sink in, letting it shore up the cracks inside her that training and weapons never could. "Promise you'll be here," she murmured. Fragile, like saying it too loud would make it a lie. Jared didn't even hesitate. "Always," he said, the kind of promise that bound itself to bone and blood and could never be broken. They stood there a long time, the night stretching around them unmeasured. No more words, just the silent exchange of breaths and the steady press of his hands on her arms. Like if he held on long enough, she wouldn't slip away into the dark roads ahead. When she finally let herself crawl into the bunk, exhaustion pulling her down at last, he didn't leave. He settled on the floor by the door, his back against the wall, every line of his body watchful, even at rest. For the first time since Korriban, Marin's sleep came without the weight of dreams trying to pull her under. She knew why. Somewhere just beyond the edge of sleep, she felt it. The quiet presence that had followed her from the day she first arrived at the Praxium. A silent vow, renewed. Whatever awaited her at Catane, she wasn't facing it alone. And I'm going to pause and get myself water because my voice is having problems. Okay. Alright. Thank you, Wraith. Also, yes, I'm wearing another one of my Into the AM shirts that you can't really see, but kind of, a little bit. I like those. They're comfy. When the stars gave way. The first light of morning had not yet touched the mountains when Marin stirred. The room was dim, only the faint glow from the estate's perimeter lights filtering through the curtains, painting pale bars of silver across the floor. The air was cool, still heavy with the hush of a house that had not yet woken. For a long moment she stayed very still, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the hours pressing down on her. Departure waited beyond the threshold of the fragile peace, and she wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. She turned her head and saw Jared. He was exactly where he had been when she drifted off. Seated on the floor by the door, his back braced against the wall, his head tilted slightly forward, his arms resting loosely across his knees. He hadn't even bothered with a blanket. There was a tension in his frame even in sleep, a soldier's vigilance that never truly faded. The sight pulled something sharp and aching in her chest. Somehow, knowing that he hadn't left, had chosen to keep his post like a quiet sentinel, made the reality of leaving hit even harder. Slowly, she swung her legs over the edge of the bunk and sat there, her elbows braced on her knees, her hands twisting together until her knuckles went white. She didn't want to wake him, but part of her wanted him awake. Wanted to hear his voice one more time before she walked out the door and into whatever the Marines had waiting. The weight of Korriban lingered like a ghost at her shoulder, whispering of everything she hadn't been able to stop. She thought of Rhenius, of the girl that they couldn't save, of every choice that hadn't been enough. The uniform was folded neatly at the foot of her bunk, wasn't just fabric and insignia. It was a promise she wasn't sure that she could keep, but one that she had to try. Jared stirred, as if he'd heard those thoughts instead of the faint shift of her weight on the mattress. He blinked, his eyes bleary for just a second before sharpening and finding hers in the dim light. "You didn't sleep long," he murmured, his voice low and rough like gravel softened by water. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Marin shook her head, a small, helpless gesture. "I didn't want to waste it," she admitted. "Time's too short." He pushed himself up to his feet, moving in that quiet, careful way that spoke of years spent making every motion count, and crouched in front of her. "Time is never long enough," he said, resting his forearms on his knees so that his gaze stayed level with hers. "But you've got what you need. You always have." She let out a shaky breath, her eyes dropping to the tags wound around her fingers. "It doesn't feel like it," she whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear, but she knew he would catch it. "It feels like every time I think I can hold the line, someone slips through, and I can't keep losing people." The last words broke, the rough edges cutting at her throat. Jared's hands closed over hers before the thought could spiral further, his grip firm, warm, and unshakable. "Marin," he said, and there was a strength in his voice that anchored her, that left no room for doubt. "You're still standing. After Korriban, after everything. You're still here. That means something. It matters. And I swear to you, whatever comes next, you're not carrying it alone." She swallowed hard, blinking fast, staring down with her joined hands like they were the only thing keeping her tethered. "What if I can't do this?" she asked, not quite believing she'd said it aloud. Jared didn't flinch. "Then you come home," he said without hesitation. "It doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. You come back here and we figure it out. Together." Sorry. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a quiet promise in the simple touch. "But I know you, Marin. You'll do more than get through it. You always do." For a moment, all she could do was breathe, shakily and uneven, trying to draw strength from that certainty. Finally, she looked up, meeting his eyes, and in that gaze was something steady, something unyielding that refused to let her fall apart. "You're sure?" she murmured, the question small, childlike despite everything she'd seen and done. His lips quirked, just a little, not quite a smile, but close enough to hold warmth. "Always." The estate's distant comm alert broke the moment, a low chime that meant the shuttle would be arriving soon. Neither of them moved at first, holding on to what little time they had left. When they did, it was slow and reluctant. Marin stood, slinging the duffel over her shoulder, feeling the weight of every step toward the door like it was dragging a piece of her heart behind. Jared fell in beside her without a word, the silent promise of protection in his stride, even if he couldn't follow her past the shuttle's ramp. At the main entrance, under the soft glow of the pre-dawn stars, they paused. He reached out, gripping her forearms in the old familiar clasp they'd shared in training, a warrior's bond between equals. "Recherche me, Marin," he said, his voice low but strong, carrying the weight of every unspoken vow he'd made behind it. She gripped his just as firmly, meeting his gaze one last time, her eyes burning with everything she couldn't say. "Until we meet again," she whispered, and for a moment the night seemed to hold its breath around them. And then the sound of the approaching shuttle split the quiet, and the stars began to give way to dawn. I'm gonna pause there. I don't know why it's not telling me when I have ads. Sorry, my friends. Give me 1 second. Trying to keep track of when the ads pop up. Should be every half hour. I usually have a thing that pops up in chat, but I might have to double check that. The weight of silence. Butane, the Marine Recruit Depot. The depot smelled of rain-wet Duracrete and oiled blasters. It wasn't home, not even close. But it carried that same quiet hum of discipline she had grown up under. The muted bark of orders, boots on gravel, the undercurrent of something harder in the air. Marin kept her shoulders square as she crossed the yard, the strap of her duffel digging into her collarbone. Everything she owned worth carrying was inside. A small data pad, the lightsaber she still wasn't sure she deserved to carry, a spare flight suit, and the weight of Jerry's tags hidden beneath her tunic where no one could reach for them. She hadn't worn them outside her clothes since Bastille, not since she'd learned what a name could cost you when it slipped into the wrong hands. Hi, Wicked! Welcome in! Can I get a shout out for Wicked, please? She moved like someone trying to be invisible, but those who knew what to look for, IT, Collins, any old soldier with half a hunter's eye, would see it anyway. The slight catch in her step, left over from the clearing on Synagus, the careful way she held her ribs, favoring the side Korriban hadn't let heal clean, the way her eyes slid to every exit before she committed to the next few paces, calculating distance, hover, and escape. She didn't wear fatigues yet, not here, not now. A plain training tunic in muted gray, dark trousers, her boots scuffed from travel, a small concession to blending in, or as close as she could manage. She wasn't here to announce herself, and certainly not as a Durza. The sealed orders in her duffel said enough. The intake center was as utilitarian as she expected. Bare Dursteel walls, harsh lights, a queue that looked like it had been standing since before dawn. Marin took her place near the back without a word, her eyes on the floor, counting breaths. She wasn't tense, exactly, but every part of her felt drawn tight, like a wire stretched too long and ready to snap. She didn't notice the boy ahead of her turn until his gaze lingered just a little too long on her tags. Her jaw tightened beneath her skin and the old instincts flaring. It was too late to hide them now. They were regulation issue, hanging low and visible for processing, but Star, she hated how a name could stick out like fresh blood in the water. What's a delicate thing like you doing here? He muttered over his shoulder, his voice pitched just loud enough for her to hear. Would have thought girls like you had better things to do than play soldier. Her breath stayed steady, but her fingers flexed to her sides, nails pressing half-moons into her palms. There was a time, not long ago, she would have bitten back with fire, her teeth clenched. A time before Bastille taught her what answering the wrong challenge could cost. She said nothing at first. Kept her gaze fixed on the wall ahead. The boy smirked, emboldened by the silence. Durza, huh? You must think that makes you special. Daddy's name buying you a free pass through real training. That one landed like a stone in her gut. The old reflex to defend him, defend herself, flared hot. But she pressed her tongue to the back of her teeth and forced the words down. Her breath left her slow and deliberately. Someone else in the line shifted. Older, broader in the shoulders. His voice was low, a quiet challenge meant to diffuse. Careful, kid. I'd put a gold eager on her wiping the floor with you. Marin didn't smile, but her eyes flicked sideways, the smallest tilt of her chin in acknowledgement. The first boy snorted, dismissively. Easiest eagle I ever won. The tension in the line thickened, waiting for her to rise to the bait. She didn't. Not with words. Not now. The sergeant's voice cracked like a whip from the head of the line. We have a problem here. Everyone froze. Marin shook her head, once, her tone clipped and quiet. No, Sergeant. The boy straightened like a guilty cadet. Just making conversation, sir. The sergeant's look said he wasn't fooled. And when Captain IT came over, the fix was decided. A match to settle it, discipline before the briefing. Marin gave a single nod. No theatrics, no hesitation. She handed her satchel to the one who'd backed her, loosening her shoulders, breathing deep. Oops, sorry. And I'm gonna pause right there because we have an ad in like 26 seconds. I'm gonna give myself a chance to get some water. I actually was paying attention this time. Hi, Wicked, how are you? Alright, my friends, we are back. Marin moved to the center of the floor with quick steps, every motion efficient and deliberate. There was no wasted effort. She didn't call on the force more than a whisper. It wasn't needed here. The boy telegraphed every swing, all bluster and no patience. She slipped past his strikes, redirected his weight, let him fall onto his own momentum. when his insults kept coming when he made the mistake of giving her his back. She locked him clean and quick, applying pressure just enough to silence him without damage. A lesson, not cruelty. The sergeant stopped her, and Marin released him immediately, stepping back, her hands loose at her sides, her breath even. There was no intention of harm, Sergeant, she said softly, her words carrying just enough for the circle around them to hear. Mendoa slipped out under her breath, quiet enough, barely a ghost of sound. Her orders were checked. The boy was sent packing. She then retrieved her satchel, offering the older recruit a nod of thanks, and followed the others inside when she was called. There was no swagger, no satisfaction. She claimed no victory. Just the same quiet calculation in her eyes, the weight of a name tucked deep under her collar, and the resolve that she wouldn't let anyone, not here, not again, decide who she was supposed to be. Quiet reckonings. Second. Oh, goodness. The office was silent but for the low hum of the wall relays and the faint rustle of a datapad being set aside. Outside, booted feet moved in precise cadence on the training grounds, a distant counterpoint to the stillness. The light above the door glowed amber. Field dampeners engaged, as was standard when conversation wasn't meant for curious ears. Marin knew the protocol. She knew the weight it carried. She stood just inside the doorway, her back straight, her chin level, her hands clasped behind her. The veil might have been lifted in name, but here she remained an asset, her every step still measured under its shadow. Captain IT didn't speak immediately. He finished scanning the sparse file on his desk, flipping through each page with a practiced slowness that carried meaning in itself. Finally, he closed the folder, tapped it once with 2 fingers, and set it down in front of him. His eyes met hers, sharp and evaluating. The eyes of a man who had seen enough of the galaxy to know that paper orders rarely told the whole truth. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. When she did, her posture precise but tense, he leaned back and steepled his hands in front of him. I read what little command saw fit to put in here, Dursa. It's not enough. Not for me. Orders or not, I need to know what I'm dealing with. He paused, his gaze steady on her face. And you know I knew your father. I won't pretend that doesn't mean something. So tell me, why do you walk in here with no formal basic, no squad maneuvers logged, and yet signatures from Master Card, Admiral Connors, Colonel Talon? That doesn't happen for just anyone. Marin's hands tightened on her knees before she forced them still. She drew in a slow breath, let it settle, and before she spoke. Her voice was even and clipped, but there was weight behind every word. Because, sir, my record doesn't fit in a neat file. His brow arched slightly, but he said nothing, letting her continue. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed just over his shoulder, not daring to look away entirely. Galon first, she said. My father was murdered there. It wasn't an exercise, it wasn't clean. We went in on bad intel. It was a trap, meant to draw me out. I was 13 at the time. Her jaw tightened. It was the first time I learned what Death Watch really meant. She shifted slightly in the chair, her boots planted squarely on the floor. And then Bestine, mere months later. I wouldn't remember it if not for the others. A guild technique that should have been burned from the galaxy a century ago. Her voice faltered just for a second before hardening again. Paralysis needles. Compliance forced so deep I couldn't move, I couldn't fight, I couldn't scream. Ethan and Master Sergeant Greer, they're the ones who pulled me out of that cell. They saw what was left of me. I didn't wake up until it was over. They told me what happened after. That's all I have. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. No judgment, only a soldier weighing facts against scars. Marin drew another slow breath, let it out, but the next words came with an edge, like they were being forced past old brakes. The Tanagas, the clearing, they didn't need compliance needles then. They destroyed my knees, left me for dead. Jared carried me out. Ethan, Iran, a quiet beat, heavy between them. Oops, sorry. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Jared carried me out. It took me months to walk again. I still limp even now. I probably always will. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the dampeners. Her gaze dropped for the first time to her own hands before she made herself look up again. And then there was Coruscant. We had a mole in Republic Command. We ended up taking him down, but Bevan was there too. Deathwatch, the Sith. We crossed blades in the middle of that chaos, and I didn't walk away clean. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes dark, her voice low but steady. And then there was Korriban. We went in for Brennius, and there was Deathwatch again, and Bevan. And what I saw there, what I had to face there, she stopped, swallowed hard, the muscles in her jaw jumping. It was the Ash my father could have become if he'd joined them, if men like Bevan had won him over back then. That's what we walked into. That's what I walked out of.
Make yourselves comfortable. My master will be with you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for the follow. Thank you so much for the follow. Duelish, welcome in. I am reading one of my fan fictions. Okay. Give me just 1 second, my friends. Alright, give me 1 sec while I find out where I was. Oh, goodness. I lost my spot. Hold on just a moment. Okay. Okay. Figure where I was. I lost my place. Give me just a moment. There we go. There we go. I am reading chat. Just give me a moment. Okay. The silence that followed was thick, a gravity that settled over the small office and made the air feel heavier. She sat straight, every inch the Marine she'd been trained to be, but the truth of those words lingered between them like the echo of a battlefield. She hadn't flinched, hadn't lied, hadn't tried to make it smaller than it was. He deserved the truth. He'd asked, and she'd given it. IT let the weight hang for a long seconds before he finally leaned forward, closing the folder and setting both hands flat on the desk in front of him. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but no less firm. Orders stand, but now I know what kind of fire walks into my unit. We'll make sure it doesn't burn you down from the inside, Private. If you're going to be in my chat, please follow the rules when you come in here. I do try to pay attention to chat, okay? But I am also reading, so I may not always catch everything. So please have some patience. Okay. I will be right back. I need to go get some more water. All right, my friends, we're back. I needed to refill my water. Or was I? Oh, yes. She nodded once, crisply. Yes, sir. He tapped the folder once more, then glanced towards the door. The rear is waiting outside. He'll brief you on departure and gear stowage. Step out, keep your head down. Veil asset or not, you know the protocols. Marin rose to her feet and saluted sharply. He returned it, and she turned on her heel to leave, the amber light over the door flickering back to green as she stepped through. The weight of the conversation didn't lift. Not fully. Some burdens never did, but at least now, here, someone else carried a fraction of it beside her. Quiet vigil. Catane, Marine Depot Transit, early evening. The depot was never truly silent, but the hours between assignments brought a lull, a pause where the heavy march of boots on ferrocrete faded to a distant hum, and only the muffled palms chatter carried through the hall. Marin walked out of Captain IT's office with her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. Her salute had barely dropped before she turned down the corridor, her hands tight around the edge of her orders packet. If anyone looked close enough, they might have noticed the way her left hand trembled, just a fraction, before she buried it in her pocket. Greer was waiting 2 doors down, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, the stance of a man who could look casual without ever being off guard. He gave her a space until the office door shut behind her and the signal light above it clicked from amber to green. Dampening field disengaged. Only then did he shift his weight, his boots scraping lightly against the floor. "Walk with me, kid," he said quietly, just enough gravel in his voice to make it sound like an order to anyone listening. To Marin, it was a thread of steady ground. She fell in beside him without a word, grateful for the excuse to move. They crossed the depot corridor towards the outer transit doors where the evening air bled in, cooler and carrying the tang of approaching rain. Greer didn't speak again until they'd cleared the threshold and reached the shadowed overhang where the transport vehicles lined up in neat rows. Only then did he glance sideways at her, reading the set of her shoulders, the too even pace of her stride. "File looks clean enough," he said finally, his tone deliberately neutral. "But I heard the tone in there. Didn't stay surface level, did it?" Marin hesitated, swallowing hard. She could have deflected, invoked veil protocol, but this was Greer. He'd been there for some of the worst of it, carried pieces of truth that no one else could. She let out a slow breath. "No, Sergeant. The captain asked for a straight record. I gave him what I could." There was a pause. "Not everything is on paper." He gave a low hum of agreement, his eyes still forward as they reached the first row of transports. "It never is." They stopped near the corner of the vehicle bay, out of earshot of anyone loitering. Greer shifted to face her, his gaze steady but soft enough to take the edge off the uniform's weight. "Marin, you don't have to carry every detail in front of them. You know that." "I know," she said, flipped but not defiant, her fingers tightened on the edge of the orders packet again. "It doesn't make it any easier." Greer studied her for a long moment and then inclined his head slightly, his voice dropping low, meant for her alone. "Bastine isn't something you remember, and maybe that's a mercy, but I do. And I know Ethan's filled in the blanks you asked for." His jaw worked, an echo of old anger in the set of his mouth. "What happened in that cell wasn't on you. It never was." Marin blinked, her breath catching, but she didn't speak. He went on carefully, giving her the same truth he always had. "No more, no less. I know what you walked out of on Galan, what you had to see there. I saw what was left of you after the clearing on Tanagas. Hell, I saw Jared and Ethan carrying you out like you were made of glass. And I know what Coruscant and Korriban put in your blood after all of that." His hand flexed at his side and then stilled. "You faced more live fire and worse odds than half the seasoned Marines in this yard, kid. Don't let anyone, even the captain, read that file and think it's the whole story." Marin's throat felt tight, words stuck somewhere between wanting to answer and the weight of knowing he was right. She gave the smallest nod instead, a quiet acknowledgement. Greer let the silence breathe for a moment and then tipped his head toward the waiting transport. "Come on. We've got a move to make, and I'm not letting you ride point alone. Not this time." Something in her chest eased, just enough that the next breath came easier. She followed him toward the transport, not quite at his shoulder, but close, like the silent guard he'd promised to be since Bastine. And if the sergeant's presence in her periphery made the depot's shadows seem a little less heavy, she didn't question it. Making sure I hydrate. Sorry, friends. Veil lessons in passing. The ride out of the depot stretched on under a haze of low chatter and engine hum, the kind of background noise that lulled most of the recruits into quiet nods or dulled stares. Metal benches groaned softly as weight shifted, boots scuffed faintly against the Durasteel floor, and somewhere closer to the front, a trooper let out the occasional low cough. Speaking of. Marin sat near the rear, her shoulders squared, posture neat but tense. Her hands were folded too tightly over the orders packet in her lap, her knuckles pale under the strain. She kept her gaze fixed on the narrow viewport, watching rooftops and landing spires fall away beneath the repulsor lifts. But Greer, 2 seats over, appearing for all the world like he was dozing, could read the churn beneath her stillness. He waited. He let the minutes stretch, let the recruit beside him nod off, let the weight of the ride settle before he moved. Only when he was certain no straight ears were paying attention did he shift forward, his forearms braced on his knees, his voice pitched low and deliberate. Marin, he murmured. The name was just enough to pull her from her spiral. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp but wary. What I'm about to say doesn't leave this bench, he continued, every word carrying quiet command. Not ever. Understood? She nodded once, the gesture clipped, but solid. Oh, sorry. He glanced around again before settling, his gaze steady on hers. Veil protocol doesn't end just because some admiral signed a paper. You're still a Veil asset. That means targets don't stop hunting just because you're off the manifest. His tone wasn't harsh, just a soldier's truth laid bare. That's fact. Nothing else. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. Greer tapped his index finger against his knee once, the sound soft but deliberate. Rule 1. Don't give a clean pattern. Travel quiet. Keep them guessing. If you're not on the books, stay off the radar. Rule 2. No names in open air. Out here, you're another Marine in a line of Marines. Let them forget the rest. Marin's breath hitched, almost too faint to hear. Even here? Especially here, he said, low and certain. Not everyone in uniform earns trust. You know that better than most. His voice dipped a fraction lower, if it were even possible. Bastine proved it. Tanagas hammered it home. Her hands tightened over the orders packet, her nails biting into the flimsy. And before she could stop it, memory bled past the wall she kept up tight around those days. Not crawling. Never crawling. Their boots had dragged her to the center of the forest clearing, forcing her into a kneeling posture on shattered ground. Deathwatch hands on her shoulders, one cruelly pressing her down, the other flicking a weighted shuriken with deliberate aim. The first knee had exploded in fire when it hit, pain white hot and blinding. She hadn't even screamed before the second blow came. A boot, a strike with intent to break. Something gave way inside her leg, a sound she felt more than heard. And then there was only dirt and blood and their voices above her. Orders were barked, questions spat and snarling Mandoa, and the weight of the world tilting sideways until it blurred out. She never remembered how she got out. Only that later she'd woken to Jared's arms steady under her shoulders, Ethan's low voice somewhere close, a round covering their flank as they moved fast through the trees. She hadn't walked. She couldn't. And for months after, learning how again had been an agony all of its own. Greer's voice cut through the haze, firm enough to anchor her. Rule 3, he said, quieter now but no less sharp. You trust that pull in your gut. Doesn't matter who's barking orders. If something tells you to move, you move. Veil assets live because they listen when it matters most. She swallowed hard, breathing once, twice before meeting his gaze again. I'll remember, she said, her tone clipped but steady. He gave a single nod, like he'd been waiting for nothing else, and leaned back. The hum of the transport filled the silence between them once more, but Greer didn't let his watch slip. Connors had put him there for a reason, and he wasn't about to let history repeat itself, not while he had breath to stop it. a quiet word off the parade ground. The day had been long, relentless in the way only Marine training could be. It wasn't even official yet, just arrival procedures in processing and a first taste of what the next weeks would demand. But by the time the sun dropped low over Catane's horizon, the recruits were hollow-eyed and slow-moving. Marin kept pace, but even as she moved in step with the others toward the barracks, she felt the edge of fatigue creeping in, tugging at old injuries like ghosts that had refused to stay buried. Orders had dismissed the recruits for the night. Most filed toward the mess hall or bunks without another word, the weight of command already pressing down. Marin lingered a moment longer, making certain her gear was stowed, her posture still disciplined enough to draw no attention. It was only when the last stragglers drifted past that she felt Greer's presence at her shoulder. "Durza," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that it didn't carry. "Walk with me." I'm gonna pause there because we're about to be in an ad that I'm actually trying to pay attention for this time. I will be right back, my friends. Take that minute and a half, get yourself some water, a snack, stretch, something. Alright, my friends, hopefully we're back from that ad. I know it's a little bit off of the notifications, so I do try to give it a few extra seconds to catch up. Alright. He didn't wait for an answer, just turned down one of the side corridors leading away from the barracks. She followed without hesitation, her boots soft against the decking until they slipped out a narrow door to the edge of the compound. The air outside was cooler, the sky washed in streaks of violet and silver as the last of daylight faded. There, away from ears and eyes, Greer thumbed the control on a small device clipped to his belt. A faint red light blinked above the door they'd come through, the kind of thing only someone trained would notice. A low hum settled around them, the sound-dampening field cutting the outside world to a hush. Marin knew better than to speak first. Greer stayed silent for a long moment, his arms folded, his eyes sweeping the perimeter before settling on her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet steel. "You know why Connors put me here," he said. It wasn't a question. She hesitated, and then nodded once, firmly. "To make sure that I don't vanish off the books again." Greer's mouth twitched, not a smile, but something darker. "To make sure that if someone tries, they don't succeed this time." He shifted his weight, his gaze steady on her. Tanagas should have been the end of it. Bastine damn near made it one. I won't have a third strike on my watch. Her throat felt tight, but she forced herself to stand firm, to meet his eyes. "I'm not planning on letting it happen again." "Plans don't mean much when the Galactic plays dirty," he countered, his voice low but carrying all the weight of experience. He took a step closer, his tone even but roughened by memory. "Bastine," he stopped, his jaw clenching. "You don't remember most of it. You were locked down by that old guild filth they used on you, but I do. Ethan does. We pulled you out of a room no one should have walked out of, let alone a kid. That should have been ashes in history books, buried a century ago. Instead, it was you on that floor." Marin's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting crescents into her palms. Greer let the silence hold for a beat before continuing. "Then, Tanagas, you didn't crawl out of that forest. Jared carried you. Ethan and Ren cleared the path. They had you kneeling in the dirt, ready to break you for good, and for months after, every step you took hurt like hell because of it." His voice dropped even lower, the next words like a vow laid in stone. "If you think I'm going to stand by and watch them, or anyone else, get another shot at you, you don't know me at all." She swallowed hard, breathing slow to keep the sting from her eyes. Her reply was clipped but steady. "I know you, Master Sergeant." He studied her a long moment and then nodded once, sharp and final. "Good. Then you know this too. Veil or not, you stay alert. You don't trust easy, and you sure as hell don't fight alone if you can help it. You're here to train, not to prove that you can survive another ambush." Marin drew in a steady breath, her shoulders squaring, and gave a single crisp nod. "Understood." Greer looked satisfied enough with that, though his eyes stayed hard. He deactivated the dampening field, the night sounds of the base creeping back in. Before stepping back inside, he paused just long enough to lay a heavy, grounding hand on her shoulder. Not a gesture of command, but of promise. "Get some rest, kid," he said, his voice dropping softer for a fraction of a second. "Tomorrow doesn't get easier." And with that, they walked back toward the barracks, nothing more spoken between them, but an understanding carved deep in the silence. Give me just a second. Okay. Quiet frequency. The adrenaline still hadn't burned out of Marin's blood. Her hands were steady enough now that she could clip the holocom from her kit bag, but there was a faint, traitorous tremor when she thumbed the activation pad. The room was dim, the narrow bunk opposite hers empty. The only other female recruit was still down in the mess. That was fine. Marin needed this quiet, this moment away from watchful eyes, away from the weight of whispered Durza drifting through the intake center like a half-remembered curse. They'd allowed her one personal call on a secured channel with Marine tech monitoring their encryption handshake from the hall. It had taken her too long to settle on a calm frequency, too long staring at the blank field before her fingers moved, entering Ethan's private frequency from memory. She sat down hard on the edge of the bunk as the comm unit chimed, waiting. Her pulse tight in her throat. Far away, in the hum of the Durza Estate's armory, Ethan was oiling a rifle bolt when the holocom flared to life. He frowned, wiped his hands on a cloth, and thumbed the receiver to life. The static cleared, blue light shaping Marin's small, tense figure where she sat hunched on a bunk far from home. "Marika." His voice was even, low, the kind of tone that settled nerves simply by existing. "You're through safe?" She swallowed hard. her gaze darting around the room before meeting his. I thought you should know. Her voice caught slightly, her breath suddenly unsteady. Something happened when I arrived at the intake center, on Catane. Ethan's brow rose, but nothing in his tone shifted. A veteran's calm, measured and unshaken. Is that so? Marin nodded once, chewing on her lower lip until it hurt. One of the other recruits decided to take issue with me, with being a Delish, with being a Durza. The last word came clipped, sharper than she meant. Her hand rubbed absently at a sore spot on her arm where the altercation had left its mark. Ethan let out a sigh, leaned back against the workbench behind him. And this has been resolved, I hope? Aye, she admitted softly. Not how I wanted, but her fingers curled tight against her knee. It left me wondering something. He tilted his head slightly. Lek, what's rattling around in that mind of yours? Marin hesitated, her words slow and measured. The way he talked, it made me wonder if he was Hirasad sympathizing, if they've slipped more moles into the system than anyone knows. Ethan's frown deepened. There were old memories in the set of his jaw. Old fights on Catan's dark edges where Deathwatch still bled their poison into young recruits. His voice stayed even, but weight suddenly sat beneath it. It's possible. Never assume otherwise. She swore softly, low and tight. It bothers me that he got that close to a uniform. Makes me wonder how many more are out there, waiting. Aye, Marika, he said, the name quiet, and he used it as a tether. If there's already been one incident, keep your eyes open. You see or hear anything that smells wrong, you tell someone you trust, and you stay aware. She drew in a slow breath, nodding. Aye, there could be another incident. My thoughts exactly. He paused, studying her holographic image with that calm warrior's gaze that always seemed to see further than the moment between them. But don't let it gnaw holes in your focus. You've got good Marines near you, and one more shadow watching, even from afar. Some tension bled from her shoulders, just a fraction, as a steady cadence sank past her nerves. Seems I made an impression already, she admitted, managing the faintest flicker of a smile. Between that incident and the nature of my orders, more than a few eyebrows went up. That earned the smallest chuckle from Ethan, quiet and warm. I'm not surprised. You've got a knack for rattling cages without meaning to. She gave him a mock glare, tired but faintly amused. Lek? Lek, he replied, his lips twitching at the corners before the expression faded. Everything else smooth enough? Aye, she murmured. The training's not too different from what you taught me when I was younger. Feels strange, though. Only one other girl in the platoon. Ethan's shrug was a slow roll of his broad shoulders. It varies term to term, but the Marines are mostly a man's branch. It's old habits, old traditions that haven't caught up to what war really demands. She frowned, chewing at her lip again. It seems wrong. It is, he agreed softly. But you're not here to fit their mold. You're here because you're already twice the fighter half of those boys will ever be. Silence held for a long moment, studying her. And then she nodded, the tremor in her hands finally gone, replaced by the steel he always seemed to lend her just by speaking the truth. Aye, she whispered. They spoke for a few minutes more of nothing and everything until duty reclaimed the moment. When she cut the channel and the holocom's glow faded, the room felt less empty, and the night less long. Quiet watch. The barracks had gone still long before midnight. The recruits were finally asleep, their restless murmurs fading into the even breathing of the exhausted. The narrow corridor outside Marin's assigned quarters was dark, the faint glow strips along the floor the only light. She hadn't expected much privacy here, but with only 2 female recruits in their platoon, they'd been given single bunks instead of the open bay. Practicality, not favor. Less noise, fewer questions, but it also meant silence pressing in on all sides, kind that made old ghosts stir. She lay on her bunk, her uniform jacket folded neatly on the chair, her boots tucked beneath the frame as regulation demanded, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time her eyes closed, she felt the phantom weight of restraint. Knees in the dust, cold floor beneath her, the echo of boots crunching around her. Deathwatch laughter that wasn't there anymore. Her hands curled slowly into fists on top of the blanket. The door chime made barely a sound, the light above the hatch giving a muted amber flicker before the panel slid open. Burr stepped in without much ceremony, closing it behind him and engaging the dampening field with a quick swipe of his wrist. The air shifted faintly, the hum of the corridor vanishing like someone had drawn a curtain. Marin. His voice was quiet, steady, not asking if she was awake, just knowing. You've got that look like you're about to pace a hole through the deck. He glanced around the small room, no more than a bunk, a chair, and a locker. Sparse, utilitarian, the walls were bare, not much to shield her from memory. She pushed herself up on one elbow, a touch embarrassed, but didn't try to deny it. It's nothing, Master Sergeant. Her voice was low, clipped out of habit, but the raw edge in it was hard to mask. Just can't shut my head off. He stepped closer, the weight of his boots making barely a sound on the metal deck, but every movement deliberate. It doesn't surprise me. He didn't sit, but leaned one shoulder on the bulkhead, his arms folded across his chest. After everything, you don't just switch that off because the lights went out. His gaze softened, but his tone stayed measured, almost clinical. Bestine, the clearing. You know as well as I do your mind's still bracing for the next hit. She nodded slowly, drawing her knees up beneath the blanket. I keep telling myself it's safe, but it doesn't feel like it. Greer studied her for a moment and then crouched beside the bunk, close enough to keep the conversation theirs, and theirs alone. You're not going to get the sleep you want tonight, he said bluntly, but there was no judgment in it. But you can steal the kind that keeps you on your feet. He tapped his temple with 2 fingers. Marine trick. Learned it on the front line when downtime was a myth. Marin tilted her head, curious despite the weight pressing in her chest. What kind of trick? He drew a slow breath, setting his tone low, calm, a cadence built for settling raw nerves under fire. Not real sleep. You don't chase dreams, just breathing. 4 count in, hold 2, 4 count out, slowly. You let every muscle go slack like you're shutting systems down one at a time. Don't fight the noise in your head. Let it drift past like calm chatter you don't need to answer. His eyes met hers. Even 10 minutes like that can feel like an hour if you do it right. She hesitated, her lips pressed together, and then gave a small nod. You think it'll help? I know it will, he said simply, his voice steady as iron. It kept me alive when I couldn't close my eyes without hearing the firefight waiting to start again. For the first time that night, she felt a thread of genuine calm settle beneath her ribs. She gave a small, quiet thanks, almost lost in the hum of the dampener. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. Greer straightened, deactivating the field before the silence grew suspicious. At the hatch, he paused, glanced back, his voice pitched low. Try to rest, Durza. Tomorrow's going to come fast. There was no softness in his tone that anyone outside the room could mistake for favoritism, just the unspoken weight of a Marine watching his own. And then he was gone, the hatch sealing behind him, leaving the quiet a little less heavy than before. Alright. I apparently need to drink water. That is what my voice is telling me. Approached to the wall. Catane, the fleet yards. Captain, the shuttle pilot called back into the open hold. We're about 3 minutes away from the dock. Okay, last check, IT said as he looked over the Marine squad. We are guests on the ship while going through this training exercise. They've got certain procedures for the different conditions they have to operate under, and we'll have to abide by those while we're on board. Everyone copy?" Most of the group, including their guest, nodded softly at the question. The captain walked up towards the cockpit to look out towards the ship that they were drawing closer to. Marin listened closely to the captain as he spoke and nodded her understanding. Ethan had done his best to prepare her for this, but she was still nervous. And she was pretty sure that having a member of Jedi intelligence aboard a Katani ship of the Wall wasn't normal. With that in mind, she was cautious with her interactions, but that did nothing to sate her curiosity. After a moment's hesitation, she rose to her feet and followed after IT. When she reached the flight cabin, she peeked through the transparistile and drew in a quiet breath. The ship ahead of them was vast, a fortress suspended in the void, its lines sharp and functional, every plate and rib a statement of purpose. To Marin's eyes, it was beautiful. IT heard her breath catch and looked over. "First time seeing a warship this close?" She grinned nervously but nodded. "Yeah, never really been around ships much larger than light freighters or cargo haulers," she admitted after a moment, tracing the vessel's lines with her eyes. "I don't know much about the class, but aren't the Nighthawks billeted aboard?" There were so many questions she wanted to ask, but was she allowed? "The hangars can hold 4 of them if the mission calls for it," the captain told her. "But those fighters are usually deployed on their home carriers, which are much larger than this. Normally, the hangar space would be used for assault shuttles like this one and our support gunships. About how many, pilot? Same number?" "Aye, sir," the pilot said as he lined up on his approach towards the rear of the ship. "Tight space in the hangar of these things. We usually have to do several sim runs and ace them before we're allowed to practice landing on the real thing." Marin filed that information away, watching the approach closely. She could only imagine what it felt like to fly a Nighthawk. Maybe someday she'd get the chance. She chewed her lower lip for a moment and then leaned forward slightly as something odd flickered near the hangar bay doors. Some shimmer of shield or mag field, gone in an instant. "Through the dock magcon," the pilot said as they entered the dry dock area and closed in on the hangar doors. Throttling down. 1 minute. Marker lights glowed ahead, hangar personnel waving them in with practiced precision. Marin stayed in the flight cabin, her eyes fixed on every detail. The way the deck crews moved, the scale of the armored bulkhead looming over them. There was a weight in the air, one that had nothing to do with gravity. A sense of command of lives drilled into a single rhythm of steel and silence. She wondered how long it would take before she learned to move like that, to belong even halfway to this world. The shuttle settled to the deck with a soft bump, systems powered down with a hum. "Here you go, Captain." "Enjoyed the flight," IT replied as he moved aft. "Marines, prepare to disembark. I'll hand out bunk assignments once we're on deck." Marin gathered her gear and fell in with the others. At the foot of the boarding ramp, she hesitated. A feeling, strange, sharp, like coming home, rose in her chest. She knew she'd never been on a ship like this, but it clung to her all the same. Maybe it was Jairus' spirit. Maybe just the bloodline she bore. Her fingers found his tags beneath her fatigues, thumb tracing their edge before tucking them back away. She was here to learn, to endure, and every step she took down that ramp felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't turn back from. An officer in a jumpsuit with a red sleeve band and 2 bars at the collar approached, shaking the captain's hand. Apologies for not being here sooner. I'm the ship's exec. Captain Reitman is seeing to final prep and asked that I bring you up. Crew bunks are prepped off the hangar. Per your request, we've got a separate cabin forward. Not much. I remember how cramped these things are, IT said, glancing toward Marin. Durza, follow him, get squared away, and then meet me back before I check in with the captain. Her head came up at the sound of her name. She realized, belatedly, that she was the only woman in the squad. No point in overthinking it. Yes, sir. Understood. She hefted her bag, the weight of her saber, knives, and shuriken familiar against her shoulder. Her armor had stayed home. Here, she wore only Katani fatigues. No rank, except private. It was enough. She followed the exec forward, boots hitting Deck steel in time with the hum of the great ship waking around her, every step pulling her further into this new, unyielding world of discipline and quiet strength. Sorry. The narrow corridor smelled faintly of oil and recycled air, a scent that spoke of a vessel long lived in service, its bones tempered by years in the void. The deck under Marin's boots thrummed with a quiet, steady vibration, a heartbeat she didn't yet know, but one that promised motion, duty, and the weight of steel carrying countless lives between the stars. She followed the ship's executive officer in silence, keeping to his right, not quite at his shoulder. To a Marine, this was routine, arrival, assignment, procedure. To her, it was stepping across a threshold into a world that had once belonged to Jerry Sturza, a world she had only glimpsed through his stories and his scars. Now, for the first time, she was walking its halls in his stead, trying not to imagine his shadow pacing ahead of her. The corridor was tight, built for function rather than comfort. Every bulkhead bore scuffed edges where countless boots, bags, and armor had grazed over the years of deployments. Conversations floated down the passage in low tones from Marines and deckhands alike. There was no ceremony to it, just rhythm, a vessel alive in its working day, crew moving on instinct, adjusting to the sudden addition of a visiting squad. She was an outsider in fatigues that didn't quite hang on her the same way as the others. A Jedi-trained apprentice masquerading as a Marine private. She reminded herself again, this was the point of the exchange, to learn, belong just enough to understand. The XO stopped at a narrow hatchway midway down the corridor. Forward cabin's this one, he said, tapping the control and letting the door slide open with a soft hiss. Not much space, but private, as requested. His voice held no edge, no judgment, just the tone of a man used to limited quarters and tighter schedules. Marin nodded and stepped inside. The door sealed behind her with a click that felt too loud in the quiet space. The cabin was barely larger than a storage locker, an angled cot bolted to the wall, a fold-down desk, a single locker for gear, and a narrow viewport that offered a sliver of black dotted with distant starlight. The walls were bare durasteel, the kind that seemed to hum with the ship's pulse. No room for keepsakes, no soft edges to catch on. It was a space made for rest, nothing more. Give me just 1 second, my friends. She set her duffel down with care, as though making too much noise would shatter some unseen order. Her hands hesitated on the strap a long moment before she unbuckled it, pulling free the few belongings she had brought. A spare set of fatigues, her journal, a wrapped bundle that held her saber and knives. She rested the saber across her lap once she sat on the bunk, feeling its weight, a reminder that even here she was neither fully Marine nor entirely Jedi. She turned it over in her hands, the thumb brushing the emitters before tucking it carefully into the locker. For a long moment, she just sat there, listening. The Cure spoke in soft tones, distant boot steps echoing along the deck plates, the muffled clang of tools in the hangar below, a low murmur of shipboard comms filtering through the bulkheads. This wasn't home. Not yet. But it was alive in the same way Tanagus was alive. A machine made whole by the people who lived inside it. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the wall, tracing the faint seam lines in the durasteel overhead. She imagined Jarius on a ship like this, moving with the same purposeful cadence as the Marines in the corridor, trusting his life to this hull and to the warriors beside him. What had it felt like for him, carrying his own ghost through corridors like these? Did he ever feel the same quiet dissonance she felt now? A guest among warriors, trying to earn a place without taking one? The ship shifted subtly beneath her, a long, slow roll as if flexing its muscles in preparation for departure. Marin glanced towards the viewport, catching the faint glow of the contained dock receding. Soon this vessel would be between stars, steel in silence carrying her toward the unknown. She sat forward, her elbows on her knees, grounding herself in a quiet breath. She would adapt. She always had. But for now, she let herself sit in the small, foreign quiet of the cabin, listening to the ship breathe, waiting for the next summons that would pull her into its ribbon. Okay. Okay. Let's see. There we go. We have an ad starting in 35 seconds, so I might as well just hold there. Sorry, guys. I just saw that. I'm really trying hard not to read during the ads, because that's just not cool. So, really hoping that you guys are enjoying this evening. I do apologize for some stops and starts earlier. I'm still getting used to how the prompter works, and if I'm doing multiple chapters, it's a little challenging because I have to load each one at a time. So, I will see you guys in a minute and a half. Go get yourselves a drink of water, have a stretch, and I will see you back here. Alright, we are back from our ad break, my friends. Hopefully you had a chance to have a stretch, grab a drink, grab a snack, things of that nature. Also, I probably forgot to mention that we're now in chapter 2. It's been a bit of a crazy evening. Anyway. A borrowed place among steel. IT had invited Marin with him as they ascended up the stairwells through the decks and arrived at the main corridor for what was labeled as Deck A. He motioned for her to come with him, and they started walking along the corridor. Curious, she followed behind him, looking around a bit as she did so. As different as it was to be in these surroundings, she still couldn't shake the strange feeling of belonging. She thought to mention it to him. She wasn't sure if it was the right time or place. "Excuse me, Captain," she said politely as they made their way along the corridor. "I'm not sure if I should share this, but when I came aboard, I felt a sense of belonging, almost like I'd come home." She shrugged, not wanting to get into a philosophical discussion. "Oh?" IT asked as he turned and looked at her as they proceeded down the corridor. "I'm not sure exactly how you mean that." She shrugged, not sure what to make of it either. "I don't have an explanation for it, sir," she admitted. "Just a feeling I couldn't explain. I'm sorry to say that I don't recall if your father ever spent any time on one of these ships or not." They stopped before a set of doors. In that regard, I'm not sure if he was still in the service when this class was even commissioned. Nodding, Marin paused beside him, her gaze going toward the right of the entry. She'd seen many sections of the ship denoted with a sign near the entry, but she didn't see one here. She frowned. "Where are we?" she asked after a moment. "The bridge," IT said as he walked forward enough for the doors to open. Kira's bridge, like the rest of the ship, was a small space compared to most other ships. It was a narrow space with consoles along both sides, a central console in the forward area, looking towards a set of 3 wide viewports arrayed in a semicircle. Through them, they could see the dry dock area beyond. Still, Mary noticed that holographic images were displayed across the viewports, showing various kinds of information for anyone who wasn't sitting at a console. Like most of the ship, the ceiling was low, but had consoles hanging from the ceiling at different intervals. She looked towards the back of the bridge and saw a small plotting table taking up a good portion of the rear of the room. And just about the center of the compartment was a singular chair with an officer standing just in front of it, watching over the entire workings of the bridge crew. That made sense, and she nodded as she stepped into the compartment behind him, automatically scanning. She kept her hands loose and ready out of habit. As she looked around, she noticed the holographic display over some windows and hid a smile. It was an excellent idea for as little space as the bridge had. What drew her attention next was a tactical repeater at the rear of the compartment. Perhaps she'd have a chance to study it later. For now, she kept pace with the captain, a step or two behind him as the pair made their way forward of the entry and towards the central chair. It was hard for Maren to keep her gaze from the viewports, but she managed. "Sorry I didn't make it down," the captain said without turning for a moment as he watched over everything. Then he turned and shook hands with IT. Like all the others she'd seen aboard, the uniform had 4 bars at the collar. "I'm Jonathan Reitman, the ship's CO. They told me you were coming on board, and I guess they wanted to give you some training at the same time. We're about to run a shakedown to see if we're ready to go out again." Shakedown, Maren thought. And then she remembered. The Sith attack several weeks back. Her left hand clenched into a fist before she relaxed. She glanced at IT for a moment as if asking permission. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing Reitman. "I'm unfamiliar with ships of this class. What, in general, is involved in a shakedown cruise?" She hoped it wasn't a question that would make her look like an idiot. "And you are?" She cleared her throat nervously and glanced at IT again, hoping she hadn't gotten in over her head. "Marin Durza, sir. I'm attached to IT's Marine Squad." She didn't add any other details. She knew it wasn't the time or place. "It's okay, Durza," IT told her as he looked at Reitman. "She's attached to us from the Jedi, learning techniques." Reitman nodded. "I see. Well, Miss Durza, a shakedown cruise is usually when we go and ensure everything is in proper working order. Usually it's done with a newly built ship or one that's undergone serious repairs. In our case, it's the latter. We just finished up about a month or so of repairs after we had to slug our way out of Bastion." She blushed slightly and then nodded as Reitman answered her question. She didn't know much about their mission to Bastion and thought it better not to ask. "Well, I hope everything was repaired," she said evenly as she clasped her hands behind her back to stop the urge to fidget. She knew she had nothing to worry about. "How long does it usually take?" she asked. "It all depends on what needs to be tested. the captain told her as he looked over at his exec. Sir, we're all set. The dock has given us departure clearance. All stations stand by, Reitman said as he looked to IT and Marin. You're welcome to stay here and watch. Nothing special, though. That got Marin to grin slightly, the expression fleeting and careful, as though she wasn't entirely sure if it was permitted. Thank you, sir. She eased a step back, edging to the side where she wouldn't obstruct anyone's line of sight or path of movement, yet close enough to watch every command ripple through the deck like a stone dropped into a calm pond. This was their world, not hers, but she could feel its pulse underfoot, the hum of power systems shifting, the low resonance of thrusters priming. Reitman's voice cut cleanly through the quiet, every word crisp steel. Helm, clear moorings, stand by on repulsors. Sorry. Aye, sir. Came the immediate response, fingers dancing across the helm console, toggles clicking, switches flipping with mechanical precision. Moorings cleared, repulsor lifts rising to 30%. The deck beneath Marin's boots shifted, subtly at first. A soft, growing vibration thrumming up through the steel, a living heartbeat stirring awake. She drew a long breath through her nose, letting the sensation settle into memory. This was the kind of moment Jarius had once described to her, sitting cross-legged by the old nav table of the Trasinia, his voice quiet as if revealing a secret. A ship always spoke before it moved. Magcon field? Reitman asked, his gaze already swinging toward the aft station. Dropped, the officer called back, crisp and professional. We're cleared aft. Reverse thrusters, Reitman ordered, his tone a steady anchor in the flowing stream of voices. 5-second burst. Marin stayed where she was, her spine straight, her ears tuned to the rhythm of orders and acknowledgments flowing like call and response across the bridge. The ship creaked faintly under the controlled release, inertial compensators absorbing most of the motion, but not all. Drydock slipped slowly away from the viewport, frame by frame, the massive skeletal arms of the station receding as Cure eased backward under deliberate control. We're cleared from drydock, Captain, the helmsman reported. Very well. Kuroda? Reitman's eyes swept towards signals. Confirm exit route. Route blue, level 3, came the reply, followed by another voice at the plotting table. Recommend bearing 268, Captain. Reitman's lips pressed into a thin line as he visualized the maneuver. Helm, rudder amidship at 92 degrees from the start of the turn. Z-axis plus 1,500 meters, all ahead 1/3. Marin traced the numbers in her head, sketching a rough mental map of the route. Rusty, yes, but not forgotten. A corner of her mouth quirked in satisfaction before she turned it into a small, grateful smile towards IT. He met her gaze briefly and gave a single nod, acknowledged, and understood. The bridge settled into a rhythm that was almost serene. Voices low but certain, updates coming steadily. Every motion deliberate. To Marin, it felt like watching a finely tuned squad preparing to breach a door. Different tools, different stakes. The same sharpened edge of readiness. Time blurred into the cadence of reports. Outer dock marker cleared, the plot table announced. We are free and clear to navigate, Captain. Very well. Reitman checked the chrono, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Helm, course 044 by 060, ahead 2/3. Marin let the words paint movement in her mind, slipping quietly toward the tactical plot near the rear of the bridge. She stayed just outside arm's reach of the display, not wanting to intrude, but close enough to see flickering icons marking their slow retreat from Gatane and the pale glow of Catan itself fading aft. Bridge to engineering, Reitman said, his fingers punching a code on the overhand comm. Report. She's holding steady, came the voice from below decks, rough-edged but confident. Reactor core is at 85%. We can push to full on your mark. Not yet, Chief. We'll save that for stage 2. Bridge out. Marin glanced towards IT, an unspoken question lingering in her eyes, but she didn't voice it. She let her gaze return to the tactical feed, committing the course markers to memory. The colony at Collier, she thought. She'd never been that far. New stars, new ground to stand on, maybe a glimpse of something beyond the corridors and drill fields she'd known the past few years. Bryn moved to the plotting table, scanning figures, running silent calculations in his head before speaking. Blank speed from this point to the jump, he indicated, his fingers hovering over a marked vector, then a clean hop to Pollier. We'll run secondary tests in system. Marin gave a small nod, words failing for once. Not from fear, but from the simple weight of taking it all in. This ship, these people, the mechanics of a war machine moving like a living thing around her. She was still an outsider here, but not unwelcome. Not yet. Checkpoint Bravo in 2 minutes, the navigator called. MTC notified? Reitman asked. They're watching our track, waiting on flank speed data. Understood. The captain turned towards Marin, his eyes assessing, but not unkind. Do you know much about this class? She hesitated before answering, her hands folded loosely at the small of her back. Not really, sir. I wanted to study more before the exchange, but... She gave a small shrug, her words trailing off. Maybe Stefan wanted her unsteady. Maybe Ethan had thought she needed it. A test of adaptability, of poise under fire without a weapon drawn. It felt like something they would do. We're heavy for our size, Reitman said, voice even as he studied the armor plating now sliding over the viewports. The bridge lights dimmed fractionally as visual feeds replaced the naked starfield. Recon and special operations are our bread and butter. You saw the matte hull on approach? Aye, sir, Marin replied, her tone steady despite the faint thrill in her chest. Low reflective finish. Makes sense to keep the ship harder to track by sight alone. And sensors, Reitman added with a thin, approving nod. Our engines run a quiet preset when needed, tuned out of common scan bands. It doesn't make us ghosts, but it gives us a head start. Marin's gaze lingered on the armored viewports, imagining the black hull cutting through the void unseen. A warship meant for silence, for shadow. Something in that settled deep in her bones. Nodding, she frowned slightly, her head tilting as her eyes tracked the now darkened viewports. And the armor plating? Reitman glanced towards her, the expression in his eyes somewhere between command, presence, and quiet patience. We have a system that gives us an additional edge, he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that came from years of making life-or-death calls. But looking through the viewports is blurred when we use it, so we switch to visual scanners when that's in place. XO? We're rigged for silent running, the executive officer reported from his post, his fingers flicking over controls with unhurried precision. MTC confirms intermittent tracking. They're waiting on our signal for the second phase of testing. Then let us begin. Reitman's tone sharpened just enough to be command again as he gave Marin a brief, almost conspiratorial smile before turning back to his crew. Engage cloaking device. A muted confirmation sounded from the forward stations. Moments later, the main bridge lights dimmed, the overhead whites dropping to black until only the soft pulse of console glow painted the compartment in shades of blue. The change carried a weight all its own. A ship preparing to vanish, leaving only silence and intent behind. Marin inhaled slowly. She'd read about such things in fragments of restricted reports, scattered theories whispered in the intelligence wing of the Praxium. Cloak technology had always been a possibility, never something she expected to see. Hesitantly, she opened herself to the force, brushing across the surface thoughts of the crew. Focus, steadiness, the subtle undercurrent of pride for men and women entrusted with a weapon no one should know existed. She felt no fear, only discipline, and the low thrum of anticipation. Her thoughts skipped, her pulse catching as she frowned faintly. A functioning cloak. Force, help me, it's real. It works like a shield generator system, Reitman said after a beat, as if he'd read her surprise. Outside the hull, we're invisible to the naked eye. With engine modulation, most scanners won't see us either. But emissions are our enemy. We rely on passive sensors, minimal chatter. Active scans? Might as well paint a target on our hull. Marin nodded softly, her eyes roaming the bridge, drinking in every flickering status display. After a pause, she asked, carefully but direct, if a system were damaged, an engine, a generator, cloaking would fail? Hmm. Okay. Raymond's face hardened a fraction, a memory passing unspoken in his eyes. It happened to one of our sisters at Bastion. A single reactor breach was enough to unravel their cloak, brought the fire straight to them. We learned that lesson the hard way. She fell silent, absorbing that information, the words settling heavier than she expected. Bastion. The rumors had filtered even to Tanagas. Ships limping home. Names that had never made it back at all. She lowered her gaze for a beat, her fingers tightening briefly behind her back. Disengage cloak, Raymond ordered after a few more minutes of data checks. Secure from silent running. Helm, prepare for hyperspace. The bridge brightened, consoles shifting to standard hues as the shroud dissolved. Marin exhaled quietly and slid closer to IT, still watching the tactical plot updates. MTC reports no trace of our passage, the XO announced, his voice tinged with satisfaction. No trace, Marin echoed under her breath, almost irreverent. She wasn't sure if the idea comforted or unsettled her. To disappear so completely, it felt unnatural, yet strangely necessary. She glanced towards IT, catching his profile against the glow of the displays, and then shifted her gaze back to the plot, silently tracking their jump coordinates. Moments later, the stars stretched into starlines, the cure slipping cleanly into hyperspace. Reitman stood, handing control to his XO, and gestured for them to follow. We've got several hours before Collier. It's a good time to ready for your exercises, he said as he led them into the corridor. Marin trailed behind them, absently tucking a stubborn lock of hair back under its tight coil. The regulation style still felt strange, but she had to admit less hair in the way meant fewer liabilities in a fight. She was deep enough in thought that she nearly clipped the hatchway on instinctive autopilot. We're supposed to coordinate orbital insertions with you, IT mentioned as they reached a small office. Raymond keyed the lock, ushering them inside. The room smelled faintly of metal and recycled air, datapads neatly arrayed on the desk like a soldier's kit. The captain took his seat, posture relaxed, but never careless. What's involved in an orbital insertion, sir? Marin asked, stepping into a loose, at ease stance, but leaning forward slightly, curiosity plain in her voice. Reitman's eyes warmed with a faint note of approval before he answered. Normally, we tune shields to an aerodynamic envelope. Lets us cut atmosphere without bleeding energy. It keeps our heat signature low. The cloak should hold during entry, if our math is sound. IT picked up seamlessly. Once we're in, here stays low, gunships lead, the shuttle follows. We drop fast, quiet, and hard. Surprise is the whole game. Marin nodded slowly, imagining the descent, the thunder of hull friction muted by shields, gunships streaking ahead like shadows. It would keep an enemy guessing, she murmured, her mind painting the run with every word. The concept's been proven in drills, IT said, his voice steady. Never tested live. Marin's eyes narrowed before flicking to him. And are we now? This is the training cycle, he assured her, his tone unshaken. We don't go active unless every other option fails. Reitman added, leaning forward on his elbows. This is our first run since Bastion tore holes in our hull. We're testing every fix we made before we risk anyone's life for real. She nodded, chewing on her lower lip before choosing her next words carefully. Sir. She straightened subtly, her voice measured. I apologize if I overstepped, but I didn't expect you to share such operational details with me. Not in this depth. Her gaze slid briefly to IT, and then back to Reitman, uncertain. The captain met her gaze, his fingers steepled as if weighing his words. Miss Durza, you came aboard with a reputation. Not just as a Praxium student, but as someone who doesn't break trust lightly. His voice lowered, not for secrecy, but sincerity. I've worked with your teachers. I know what kind of people they vouch for. That's enough for me. Heat crept into her cheeks despite herself. She blinked once, caught off guard, and then managed a quiet, earnest, "Thank you, sir. That means a lot. You've earned it," he said, leaning back and picking up a data pad, signaling the meeting's close. "Now, get some prep in. We'll want to see what you've got when Collier comes up on scope." Marin exchanged a glance with IT, a faint smile tugging at her lips before she followed his lead. But as they stepped into the corridor, one thought stayed with her, low and persistent. Trust aboard Cure was earned through blood and fire, and somehow, before she'd even flown a mission with them, a measure of it was already hers. I thought I was going to get to chapter 3. We'll find out. Quiet border conversations. That's a bit of a mouthful. The office door hissed shut behind them, the sound swallowed by the low, omnipresent hum of the Cure's drive cores reverberating through the deck plates. The corridor ahead was narrow, utilitarian, painted in the muted gray of warships that had seen long service. Conduits ran in straight, precise lines overhead, a few strips of glow panels casting a cool light that left the edges of the corridor in half shadow. The helm of the ship was a heartbeat under their boots, steady and alive. Marin fell into step behind IT as Reitman turned off towards the bridge once more. The Marine captain didn't speak immediately, letting the silence settle between them like a shield. They passed a pair of deckhands carrying diagnostic kits, their movements brisk and precise. The smell of ozone and lubricant hung faintly in the air, a reminder that this was a ship recently pulled from dry dock, a vessel still bearing the scars of Bastion even if her armor now gleamed like new. IT finally glanced sideways, one brow lifting slightly under the brim of his field cap. "You kept your questions measured back there," he said quietly, his tone somewhere between observation and approval. Not many young officers would know when to stop pushing a CO for details. Marin hesitated a beat before answering, her gaze fixed on the worn plating beneath her boots. "I didn't want to overstep, sir." She shifted her weight slightly, caught between Marine posture and the Jedi discipline drilled into her long before the uniform. "I'm attached for training, not oversight. I know where the line is supposed to be." "Supposed to be," IT echoed with a low grunt, not unkindly. They rounded a bend, boots ringing faintly on the deck, and the corridor stretched long and quiet ahead of them. "Lines shift fast out here, Durza. Trust moves fast, too. We don't have the luxury of long introductions on a ship like the Cure. We work on what we know, and the captain," he shrugged one shoulder slightly, "he knows enough about you to take you at your word." Marin's brow furrowed faintly. "I didn't think my reputation traveled this far," she admitted, her voice low. "I was knighted not long ago. A few months before—" She caught herself, the word clearing pressing sharp against the back of her teeth, unspoken but loud. She adjusted instead. "Before I came to Catan on exchange." "Word moves faster than you think," he said. His tone stayed steady, but there was a flicker of respect in the glance that he gave her. "People notice when a kid comes up through the kind of trials you did. We don't have many like you. Force or no force. That counts." She let that settle, uncomfortable, but warmed by it all the same. For a moment, her throat tightened with memories of those trials, of her father, of the clearing and what came after. The sound of the ship around her, the faint vibration of hull plating, the distant chatter of crew over comms, pulled her back to the present. After a pause, she asked, her voice quieter still, "Does he know?" IT's gaze flicked to her, sharp and suddenly measuring. "Know what?" "Private." Marin hesitated, searching his face for a sign. She thought about Veil Protocol, about the layers of secrecy that wrapped around everything she truly was. The missions she had run under silent orders, the things she had seen since Bastine that weren't meant for a ship's open log. Even here, she couldn't quite breathe the truth aloud. Finally, she shook her head slightly, a practiced half-smile playing at her lips. "Nothing, sir. Just wondering how much gets passed down the chain." The Marine captain studied her for a moment longer than necessary, but he didn't press. Whatever weight lay under those words, he read it as something classified, as things above his clearance or beside his need to know. And on a ship like Cure, you didn't dig into things marked quiet. Instead, he said evenly, what the captain knows is enough. The rest. His shoulders lifted in a faint shrug. The rest comes out in how you carry yourself. You've been around long enough to know we watch for that more than we watch a service record. Marin drew a slow breath and nodded, the tension easing just a fraction in her shoulders. Yes, sir. They walked on in silence for a few paces. Ahead, the hum of a nearby lift grew louder, the corridor opening into a wider junction where a pair of Marines passed by in light armor, talking quietly over data slates about atmospheric insertion patterns. RT caught her glancing their way, following the cadence of their words as if hungry to learn more, and let the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have almost been a smirk. Don't worry, Durza, he said finally as they stepped into the waiting lift. By the time we hit Collier orbit, you'll have more briefing and prep than you'll know what to do with. Until then, his gaze met hers squarely, firm but not unkind. Don't let the weight of what people think they know about you slow you down. We're here to test you, not the stories that came before you. The lift door slid shut with a soft hiss, the hum of its ascent carrying them deeper into the ship. Marin let the words settle, not sure if she felt steadier or more off balance than before, but certain of one thing. On Cure, every move, every word, every breath would count, and there would be no veil strong enough to hide what she did next. And that's the end of chapter 2, my friend, so it's well timed. I will see you in a minute and a half. Alright, my friends, we are back from that ad. Sorry. We are going to start chapter 3, The Weight of the Unknown. The weight of silence before the drop. Even though there wasn't much the Marines could do during hyperspace transit, the hangar bay never seemed to rest. The constant hum of repulsors and the muted clink of tools against hull plating gave the cavernous space a rhythm of its own. The IT had established a rotation for physical training along the outer perimeter, leaving the central lanes free for the shuttle and gunship crews, who moved with quiet efficiency as they prepped the craft. The Havocs drew most of the attention, not just from the Marines, but from Marin as well. She hadn't yet grown accustomed to these particular ships, their heavier profiles and modular weapon systems distinct from what she'd seen in previous missions with the Jedi. Her own PT was done, a blend of kata and knife drills that had caught a few sidelong glances but earned no comment. Routine anchored her nerves, steadied her pulse, and let her mind drift into focus. Sweat beaded along her brow as she lowered herself to the deck, stretching out sore muscles while watching a gunship crew run a calibration cycle. Sorry. There we go. I think I've got the fuse panel sorted, one of them called from the rear seat, voice muffled under their hum of powered systems. Run the track test again. The front seater adjusted his helmet, a low whine answering as he tapped controls she couldn't see. A moment later, the turret under the ship's nose rotated in perfect synchronization with the subtle shift of his head until it tracked directly toward where Marin sat. She froze, her breath locking in her throat, every muscle ready to spring even as reason told her there was no danger. The force hummed faintly in her senses, steadying her as she listened to the exchange. "There's a couple seconds lag," the pilot muttered. "Closer than last time, anyway." The turret swept past her again before powering down. Only then did Marin release her breath and rub a hand along her jaw, nerves sparking faintly under her skin. "Got you curious, Private?" Ati's voice cut across the bay as he approached, reading her stance as easily as if it were a tactical report. She rose smoothly, towel in hand, brushing at the sweat on her neck before meeting his gaze. "You could say that, sir," she admitted cautiously. "They were testing the weapons tracking." He nodded, glancing towards the Havoc. "It's an experimental setup. Helmet-linked targeting isn't new, but linking it to automated turret rotation, that's what we're trialing. It could make the difference when a split-second shot means survival." Marin followed his gesture to the circular barrels of the nose gun, her brow furrowing in thought. "More accurate, quicker response," she murmured, then almost sheepishly. Still felt a little like being under a scope. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of the captain's mouth. "Trust me, the gunners know better than to let one go hot in the bay. They're nervous too. It's the first deployment for the Havocs. This run is as much about testing them as testing us." She nodded, heat rising faintly in her cheeks. Not quite embarrassment, but close. "Different from Jedi Ops," she admitted, her fingers tucking Aaron's strands of hair back behind her ear. "Dangerous, but I'm looking forward to the lessons." "Good," he said, glancing around at the rotation of Marines working nearby. "Most of us won't see half the combat the Navy does, but we train to make it count when it comes." She inclined her head, watching the crews resume their checks before looking back at him. "Orders, Captain?" "Briefing in 15. Aft mess. We revert in an hour and start running live soon after." "Understood, sir." She slung her towel over her shoulder, already turning over scenarios in her mind as he moved on. The plane in shadows. Reitman was still on the bridge when IT set up the holoprojector, its pale glow casting ghostlight across the utilitarian mess tables as Marines filed in. Marin slipped through the hatch just before the start time, choosing a seat off to the side where she could listen without being under a spotlight. Gear checks came first, practice motions of strapping, testing, and securing. Her knives resting silent in their concealed sheaths, the only pieces of home she carried outside of her lightsaber. The captain's voice cut through the low murmur, calm, but carrying command nonetheless. "Sure, we'll be entering the system in just under 30 minutes. He began, tapping in coordinates that unfolded the starfield above the table. "Our training area is across the far side. We'll use the transit to finalize checks and pre-flight the shuttles. At entry plus 10, everyone's loaded and spooled for launch." Marin's gaze flicked over the glowing plot, tracking the flight path, chewing lightly at her lower lip as she did so. 4 weeks of crash course instruction hadn't left her as fluent in marine tactics as the others, but she listened, every word sinking deep. The ship will make atmospheric entry here, IT continued, highlighting a descent vector just inside the Terminator. Sparse population, minimal turbulence. Once we're under cover of cloak, the hangar doors open on my mark. The gunships first, then the shuttles. We glide down cold until below scanner threshold, 15,000 meters unless terrain dictates lower. Here will feed us live updates. With her brows furrowed, Myrn traced the vector with her eyes. Atmospheric entry from orbit wasn't part of her usual playbook. The Marines around her looked unfazed, almost casual. She rolled Jarius' tags between her fingers under the table, grounding herself in the worn etching of his name. Once we're through the scanners, the captain said, enlarging the projected landing zone. Repulsors to level off, gear down, 10 minutes to set the perimeter. The exercise ends at secure zone confirmation, and then we evaluate. Straightforward, but never simple. She took a deep breath and let the tags fall back under her collar, listening as they were dismissed. Gear up. Assemble in the hangar before reversion, IT ordered, killing the projection. Chairs scraped on the deck, boots scuffed as the squad dispersed. Myrn rose with them, her pulse drumming a steady beat beneath her skin. She made for her cabin without a word, locked the hatch behind her and stripped down with quick, practiced motions. The atmospheric suit hung waiting. Dark and unfamiliar, she laid her fatigues across the bunk with quiet care before donning the new gear, adjusting each seal and strap until it sat like armor she could trust. Only then did she let herself pause, palm resting against the bulkhead, feeling the distant hum of hyperspace like the pulse of an oncoming storm. A thin line between shadow and steel. 10 minutes, Captain, the helmsman called, his voice crisp over the low hum of hyperspace. The timer on his display ticked steadily downward towards reversion. Shearer's bridge was a quiet hive of restrained energy, each officer anchored at their station, eyes locked on glowing panels, watching for the next order to ripple through the deck like a wave. Final checks on the cloaking device are complete, the tactical officer reported, his words clipped but calm, a soldier's certainty underlying each syllable. To the right of the helm, lights flickered green across his console, a promise of readiness. Remember, Captain Reitman said as he moved with deliberate ease around the command chair, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. They know we're coming, but they don't know when we'll show up. Let's keep them guessing. His voice was steady as the ship's keel, a low anchor in the electric anticipation. Activate the cloak at 5 minutes and stand by for entry. The order unfurled through the bridge like a current, every man and woman present tightening their focus. There were no wasted words, no second guesses, only precision. At the 5-minute mark, the cloak came alive with a low thrum that reverberated through the cure's hull. Displays shimmered, recalibrated, and then settled into muted tones of blue. Condition 2 was called ship-wide, the shift immediate, practiced, unrelenting. Overhead lights dimmed, replaced by the pulse of amber indicators that watched the bridge in the colors of readiness. All along the decks, torpedo chambers rotated into position with the muted weight of steel. Turbolasers hummed on standby, and the ship bristled in controlled anticipation. Training exercise or not, Kira prepared as though war waited on the other side of reversion. Meanwhile, deep within the belly of the ship, Marin tightened the last strap of her combat armor and tested the weight of each weapon in turn. The standard issue Marine loadout was functional, balanced, built for efficiency, but beside it lay the tools that were hers alone. 2 throwing knives, their worn grips molded to her hands over years of practice. A lightsaber clipped with quiet weight to her belt, the line of it familiar and grounding. The old life on the new, strapped across the same frame. She ran a last sweep over every latch, every seal, and then gathered the kit in practiced hands and stepped into the corridor. The hum of the ship wrapped around her, steady and alive, a living creature in hyperspace. Yet beneath it all, she felt something else. A whisper on the edge of her senses, a presence she knew better than her own heartbeat. Jarius. The warmth of it slid over her shoulder like a hand laid there by someone who should have been light years away, or long gone. Marin's lips curved faintly, her eyes softening for a heartbeat as she reached up, tracing the line of his tags through her fatigues. Beware, she sent. She sent the thought into the quiet tether between them. I hope I can make you proud today. The hangar was a riot of ordered chaos. Marines locking down gear, techs shouting final checks over engine noise. The smell of fuel and cold steel sharp in the air. The Havoc gunship's cannon piece slammed shut with a hollow clang just as the captain's voice cut across the din, rough and commanding. We're 2 minutes from reversion. Load up, Jerza. You're with me in Shuttle 1. The call snapped her from her thoughts, boots pounding as she crossed the deck at a jog. Gear slung over her shoulder. Yes, sir, she answered, firm and clear, giving him a sharp nod before slipping past him into the shuttle's belly. Rows of seats lined the bulkhead, already half filled with armored figures checking and rechecking their kits. Marin dropped into the last open seat, the harness straps creaking as she pulled them across her chest. Engine stayed cold for now, the hangar suspended breath waiting to fall into motion. Around her, Marines murmured in low tones, clipped and practical, buckles checked, safeties thumbed, weapons locked down tight. Across the bay, the Havoc's crews sealed their helmets, the reflection of hard light turning their visors into blank steel promises. From her pocket, Marin drew a small stone, dark orange, worn smooth by time and thought. Jared had carved it himself, their names etched in clean Katani script along one edge, the letters barely raised under her thumb. She let the feel of it anchor her, a tether to something beyond orders and combat drills, a reminder of a friend who believed in her strength long before she'd earned it. She caught the captain's gaze briefly from the shuttle hatch, his eyes flicking to the stone, a knowing weight in his nod before he turned away to finish his head count. She let the moment pass unspoken, lips pressing into a thin line as she checked her harness one last time. Beyond the hull, hyperspace streaked and twisted, the countdown to reversion bleeding into the bones of the ship. In the shuttle's hold, Marin rested one hand on the stone, the other over Jerry's tags beneath her armor, and breathed deeply. A Jedi Knight, a Marine's daughter, a warrior who was still trying to measure up to ghosts and living men alike. Quiet before the drop. We're secured from hyperspace, the helm officer reported, his hands moving deftly over the controls as the ship settled into sublight speed, proceeding at 2/3. ETA to insertion point is 25 minutes at the speed, Captain, the navigator called from behind Reitman, her tone steady, professional without a hint of hesitation. Very well, Reitman replied, his voice carrying a weight of command that settled over the bridge like a second hull. His gaze swept bright, fixing on the sensor station. Kuroda, scanners. Relaying patrol and commercial routes now, Kuroda said, his eyes locking on the shifting readouts. Fingers tracing swift patterns over his console. There's no sign of alert to our entry. We're clean. Let's keep it that way, Reitman said evenly. Begin final checks while we set up for the insertion run. Inform the hangar we're go for the first wave of deployment. Orders flowed out from the bridge in clip transmissions, the cure turning into a live, living thing of precision and purpose, every deck aligning towards the same heartbeat of readiness. Hey, Shadow Legion, welcome in. That goes before the run. The shuttle rode smoothly on repulsors, its engines throttled low, a faint hum running under the crash rubbing and deck plating. The cabin smelled of oiled metal and dampened dust filters, a scent Marin had grown to know in every marine craft she'd ever ridden. Outside, the endless green canopy rolled beneath them, broken only by the glint of shallow rivers cutting through the forest. She sat halfway down the port side, helmet resting on her knee, carbine slung close against her chest. The orange stone Jared had given her sat warm in her palm. She turned it over slowly, letting the carved names catch on her thumb again, grounding herself in the familiar weight. The shuttle felt smaller than it was, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Boots braced for the moment the ramp dropped and they spilled into the unknown. Across from her, the captain was bent over a field map, helmet off, brow furrowed as he marked routes with a blunt stylus. When he looked up, his expression eased. Not much, but enough for a captain making sure his people understood what they were walking into. He leaned forward, lowering his voice enough to make it feel like it was just the two of them. Our part's straightforward, he said, nodding towards the hatch. Get down clean, set a perimeter, secure the LZ. The biggest strain's on the pilots and the techs right now. If they keep us off local sensors, we make it to Phase 2 without a fight. Marin glanced sideways at him, one brow quirking beneath loose strands of hair. Phase 2. The exercise brief hadn't even gone that far. She flipped a throwing knife from her thigh sheath, running the stone edge down its blade in slow, practiced strokes. Phase 2, sir? She asked, her voice quiet but steady. IT leaned back, gesturing with his carbine. Surprise insertion's only worth something if the Force can keep the element of surprise all the way to the target. If we're greenlit past the perimeter, we move on an opposing force unlit in a mock... Oh, opposing force in a mock hostage scenario. There we go. Words are hard today. That's the real test. She nodded slightly, letting the words settle as she worked the blade. It was habit, muscle memory older than the armor on her back, calming in its own way. Non-lethal? She asked, after a moment, her eyes flicking toward the modified barrel on her carbine. Extreme low power. He tapped the end cap. Less than a standard stun setting. Enough to sting and drop him for the count. Keeps it real without risking casualties. She hummed a quiet acknowledgement, resheathing the knife with a muted click. IT unfolded the map further, tracing a gloved finger along their path. Landing's out 10 clicks southeast of the objective. Any closer and their scouts might have picked up our engines. We push within 3 clicks by sunset, rest, and then advance in the dark. Clean, quiet, and no noise. Words are the real test today, apparently. I am struggling today. Words are the real boss tonight. Across the compartment, a soft shift of armor and webbing, the kind of movement no one noticed unless they were paying attention. Greer had settled near the aft bulkhead, helmet down, but Marin felt his gaze sweep the compartment, assessing every man, every inch of their gear. He wasn't looming or hovering, just there, silent as a shadow cast by someone who'd spent decades making sure people like her got home in one piece. She didn't look at him directly. She didn't need to. She caught the edge of his presence, a calm weight anchoring the hum of nerves under her ribs. Even here, with the captain talking and the shuttle flying steadily, he was in a position to move before anything went wrong. Close enough to cover, far enough to look like just another Marine running checks. IT leaned forward again, tapping the map with a finger. We reached the ridge by dusk, set camp, lights out, no sound, no comm chatter. Tomorrow we sweep in. Questions? Marin shook her head, tucking the orange stone back into her pocket before pulling her carbine into her lap. She checked the mag, the sights, the action, every motion precise and measured. Around her, the others murmured quietly, tightening straps, reviewing their kit. From the corner of her vision, Greer leaned his helmet back against the bulkhead, his posture loose, but his visor never strayed far from the younger Marine on the bench. No words, no overt signal, but the message was there. Felt rather than heard. I've got you, kid. Eyes open. Nothing touches you if I'm breathing. And for the first time since they'd loaded up, Marin believed it. Into the drop. Oh, sorry. Actually, hold on. One sec. I probably need to rearrange that. Hold on. There we go. Yeah. Boots on dirt. The last 5 minutes before touchdown stretched out like a taut wire, every second vibrating with the promise of sudden action. The forest canopy below blurred past, dark green shadows painted silver by the dying light of local noon. The gunship ahead kept low, a predatory shape hugging terrain, engines throttled just enough to keep them moving fast without leaving a long thermal wake. Shuttle 1 followed tight in its wake. Shuttle 2, a dark streak on the far right flank. Inside the compartment, Marin had her helmet on, the visor polarized against the glare they'd hit when they broke through cloud cover. The crash webbing dug into her chest with every shift in the atmospheric pressure, every small course correction. She checked her carbine again by feel alone, fingers running over the modified barrel, the magnetic seal on the power pack, the sling length adjusted for fast drop. Everything was ready. It had been ready since they'd left Kir, but keeping her hands moving kept the nerves at bay. Across from her, Captain IT studied the terrain map on his wrist display, lips pressed into a thin line of concentration. Every now and again, his gaze flicked up to the viewport, gauging horizon lines, timing angles, thinking 3 steps ahead. And to her right, 2 seats down, Greer was his usual picture of quiet vigilance. His helmet tipped down like a man conserving energy before the real work began, one hand loose on his lap, the other gripping the overhead rail just enough to stay balanced. But Marin knew better than to think he was half asleep. Even through the ambient noise of the shuttle's cabin, she could hear the subtle clicks as he checked the safety on his sidearm, quiet rasp of his glove adjusting a strap, the rhythm of a man who'd run more insertions than anyone here could count. He hadn't looked directly at her since launch, but his awareness was aligned, stretched tight, always making room for her in his mental map. She caught it in the angle of his visor once, the faint tilt that said he was noting every twitch in her posture, every sign that might hint at trouble. The man had a way of watching without anyone realizing they were being guarded, a skill honed from years of keeping people alive under worse odds than this. 2 minutes, the pilot's voice called back, sharp and clipped. Gear down on my mark. Marin let out a breath, slow and deliberate, gloved fingers curling around the orange stone one last time before she slid it back into her pocket again. The weight of it was a promise she carried, a link to something steadier than the thrum of engines or the ghost that somehow walked beside her. She tightened the straps on her crash webbing, planted her boots, ready for the lurch of descent. Word out to strike 1. The gunship pilot's voice dry but calm. LZ is clear. We're holding a half-click north for overwatch. Acknowledged, the shuttle pilot replied, his hands moving fast over the controls. Dropping in 10 seconds. Hangar doors will open on touchdown. Forest canopy rose fast, leaves blurring beneath them as the shuttle pitched slightly to the right, engines whining as it bled speed. Marin felt a change in gravity, that brief moment of weightlessness before the repulsors caught up and steadied them. The hull shuddered as they flared low over the clearing, dust and broken leaves spiraling in the engine wash. Gear down. Stand by on the ramp, the co-pilot said. Marin popped the crash webbing, rising in one smooth motion. Her carbine came to hand, sling snug, the safety checked. The other Marines around her moved like clockwork, each one already in formation by instinct and muscle memory. The landing gear kissed dirt with a muted thud, hydraulic pistons hissing. Before the shuttle had fully settled, the boarding ramp slammed down, a gust of hot, leaf-scented air filling the cabin. The captain was first out, his boots hitting dirt with a heavy, confident stride, his rifle sweeping in low, controlled arcs. The rest of the squad followed, fanning out in a textbook half-circle to secure the clearing's edge. Marin was close behind him, her boots striking soil with a muted crunch, her body dropping into a crouch automatically, her weapon up, her eyes scanning the tree line. The world smelled of loam and sap, the soft rustle of leaves loud in the absence of engines now spooled to low idle. Shadows moved only where the wind touched them. She felt Greer take up a position without looking, off her right flank, just far enough to cover her blind spot, not close enough to draw attention. His rifle was held loose in his hands, his posture casual to anyone who didn't know better, but Marin could feel how coiled he was, ready to close the distance between them in a heartbeat if anything went wrong. All clear, Esho's voice reported over comms, echoed by the other squad leaders a beat later. Bring it in, IT ordered, his voice low but carrying. Form up on the west edge. Marin swept one last look across the tree line before giving the hand signal for clear, and then retraced her steps to join the huddle. Greer's presence ghosted after her, steady and unbroken, the kind of watch you only noticed if you'd grown up with someone like Jarius keeping guard over your shoulder. When they reached the map spread over IT's portable board, Marin found herself glancing once towards Greer. He wasn't looking at her, his visor angled toward the terrain map, one hand resting on his rifle. But she knew the truth in her bones. There wasn't a single meter between here and the village that he wouldn't keep her in sight. And for reasons she didn't name, not here, not now, that knowledge let her breathe easier, just enough to focus on what came next. Okay, we have an ad starting in a minute and 20 seconds. I can start the next scene, I suppose? Yeah. Nope. Silent Overwatch. The stars outside the fort viewport hung in perfect stillness, an illusion born of distance and speed. Only the faint shimmer of atmospheric glow below hinted at the world turning beneath them. Kira moved in silence, wrapped in the ghostly veil of its cloak, holding position on the dark side of the planet. Captain Jonathan Reitman sat in the command chair, one elbow braced on the armrest, fingers tapping once in thought as the last faint thrums of the insertion launch faded from the ship's deck plates. Around him, his bridge crew moved with deliberate, measured precision. Voices kept low, the kind of quiet bred into a seasoned naval crew used to the tension of stealth operations. Launch complete, Kuroda reported from tactical, his tone clipped but even. All three craft are away and on course for the designated LZ. Gunship is leading. No sensor sweeps in their path so far. Keep a passive net up, Reitman said, leaning forward slightly. His eyes flicked to the faint blue ghost of the planet's topography on the holomap ahead of them. Any hint of a patrol vessel on the far side, I want to know before they even think about sniffing for us. I'm gonna stop right there because we're about to be in an ad, my friends. Alright, my friends, we are back from our ad break. Thank you so much for hanging around. I really appreciate it. I know that it was a bit bumpy earlier this evening, but still working out the kinks with the prompter, so please bear with. Alright. Aye, Captain, Rhoda replied, already refining the sensor net. Raymond glanced to his navigator, who shook his head silently at the unspoken question. There was no orbital activity of note. It was a quiet operation. Too quiet, his instincts reminded him. He'd done enough runs like this to know silence rarely meant safety. He rose, pacing a slow circuit behind the helm. Let's keep her steady. Orbital drift compensation manual only. Don't give anyone a power spec to read. I want cloak integrity checks every 10 minutes. If they're running detection drills down there, we don't hand them a silhouette to lock onto. The helmsman gave a tight nod, his hands moving across the console with careful precision. For a long moment, the only sounds were the soft hum of the consoles and the occasional murmur of a status update. Reitman stood at the forward rail, eyes locked on the display, knowing every decision he made here kept the Marines alive on the ground below. He folded his arms across his chest, a quiet sigh escaping before he spoke, his voice low enough only Kuroda heard. They've got good odds of staying invisible, but stealth is only perfect until someone stumbles. Kuroda finished for him, glancing up briefly. Reitman gave a faint, humorless smile. Exactly. Let's make sure they don't. Kier held her silent vigil, the weight of unblinking watch set firmly on her captain's shoulders. Silent wards. Northern forest, 4 clicks from the landing zone. The light under the trees had changed since they landed, thinning into long, burnished shafts that slanted through the canopy and cast every fern and root tangle in sharp relief. The squad had been moving for close to 2 hours, boots whispering over the soft earth, the quiet broken only by the faint rasp of gear shifting and the muted clicks of safety checks. It was a kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It pressed in close, full of listening eyes and waiting breath. Marin kept her carbine steady at a low ready, every sense tuned to the hush around them. The forest felt too still. She knew it was just an exercise. She knew there no real enemy lay ahead, yet her heart ticked faster than she liked. The memory of Bastine surfaced unbidden. Dark corridors, the hiss of a door opening too quietly. The wait before pain came again, and she forced it down, focusing instead on the weight of her weapon and the rhythm of her boots on patched dirt. To her left, Esho's point team advanced in a line, methodical, patient hunters sweeping the terrain. Ahead of them, nothing moved but leaves and the faint breeze. Behind her, the rest of the squad kept their intervals tight, stepping where she stepped, halting when she paused, somewhere off her right shoulder, not too close, not too far. Greer moved like a second heartbeat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. When Marin glanced his way, just once, brief enough to seem like checking a sector, she found him scanning the tree line with that calm, measured gaze of his, the one that never seemed surprised by trouble, only waiting for it to show its face. He had a knack for being there without drawing a line of attention to himself. Any other Marine would think he was just holding his lane in the formation, sweeping his quadrant, doing what they all were doing. Marin knew better. Every time they shifted through dense brush, Greer angled his line to keep hers in sight. When the squad fanned to skirt a fallen tree, he slid over a pace, casually, as though it was just better ground, but it kept him between her and the long stretch of open flank. He never looked at her, never gave it away, but she felt his presence like an anchor holding steady just behind her shoulder. They reached a shallow rise, and Esho's hand went up in a closed fist. The squad froze instantly, dropping to knees or crouches, eyes sweeping the tree line. Marin went down to one knee, her carbine up, listening hard. The forest breathed. There was no movement, no sound but their own faint gear creaks. From her right, there was a low whistle, a bird call, one of the silent signals Greer favored. Not for her ears only, but it settled her nerves all the same. It said, "Clear sector, eyes open. I've got you covered." She didn't have to look. She shifted her sweep wider, trusting him to guard the other angle. That silent coordination steadied her pulse better than any deep breath could. Sorry. Esho moved them forward again. The pace slowed, every step a deliberate choice on the forest floor. Marin kept low, her carbine sweeping between the trunks ahead, the hair on the back of her neck prickling. Not with fear, but with the tension of waiting for something to snap. Greer's presence never wavered. Even when she couldn't see him in her peripheral vision, she knew exactly where he was. Like a tether, like her father had been when they ran drills on Tanagas 5's high ridges. Quiet, watchful, always close enough to catch her if she slipped. By the time they stopped to regroup at a dry creek bed, her nerves had settled into the rhythm of the patrol. She knelt in the shadow of a twisted oak, checking the mag in her carbine, her eyes still on the tree line. A few meters back, Greer crouched against a root, his helmet tilted just enough that she caught the faint glint of his visor aimed outward, covering their rear. No words passed between them, but the weight of his silent watch felt like an unspoken promise. Nothing gets to you, kid. Not on my watch. The long walk in silence. The line moved like a shadowed ribbon through the undergrowth, boots whispering over damp soil, the occasional branch snapping under a careless heel muffled by distance. Oh, sorry. Esho's point team kept low and steady, never breaking stride, every man and woman scanning arcs of fire with the kind of vigilance born of endless repetition. Behind them, Captain IT's squad advanced in a staggered column, each step measured to keep them in sight of the lead without presenting a clustered target. Marin kept her place on the left flank, close enough to see IT's hand signals, but just far enough that she could break off if the terrain forced it. Her helmet's heads-up display painted soft amber icons for each Marine within line of sight, flickering occasionally as vegetation broke sensor locks. The forest here was thick, branches knitted overhead to turn the light into shifting gold-green layers. The air heavy with the scent of moss and rain-soaked bark. Every breath felt filtered, slowed, as though the world itself was holding its voice down to a hush. She didn't remember it being this tense before Galan, or even before Bastine. This was different. Chaos she hadn't chosen, violence with no warning and no clean lines to follow. This, at least, was ordered, planned. But the weight in her chest was the same. She shifted her grip on the carbine, adjusting the sling for the 10th time just to keep her hands busy. Behind her and a little off-center, Greer walked like a man born to this kind of ground. Nothing about his stride marked him as her shadow. He never let his path mirror hers too closely. Sometimes he let a sapling or patch of brush slip between them, as though the only thing they shared was a heading on a silent march. But she knew he was tracking her every movement, not with a soldier's suspicion, but with the quiet, sharp awareness of someone who'd learned a long time ago that losing sight for even a second could cost a life. The first time she'd met him, she'd been a kid. 9, maybe 10. Her boots were too big for her, the barracks halls on Catan louder than anything she'd ever heard. Jarius walking her past rows of men and women who seemed carved from armor and fire. Greer had been there, leaning against a bulkhead with his helmet tucked under one arm, one brow raised at the tiny shadow following Jarius' footsteps. He'd said little, but his eyes had been the same then as now. Cool steel, quietly measuring, not unkind but not soft either. A Marine's eyes. A second time, he'd been a silhouette against the fading light at her father's funeral. She'd recognized him by stance alone, standing a little apart from the line of saluting Marines, watching her with the same unreadable gaze. Later, when the fire burned low and the wake was just murmurs over bitter drinks, he'd come close enough to murmur a few words she barely remembered. Something about Jarius, about keeping a promise, and that had been that. Until Bastine. Now, walking the silent track through alien woods, she could feel the shape of that promise all over again. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to make it obvious. It was there in how he let his own pace shorten just enough if hers did, in the way he checked their six without drawing attention, in the slight turn of his helmet any time the line flexed or the forest ahead thickened. It was a shield made of presence, carried quiet. The column stayed mostly dark. Only the occasional hand sign passed forward from Esho, or a whispered time check from IT. Every Marine had learned how to live in silence during a trek like this, conserving breath, blending into the rhythm of the forest. Even Marin matched it now, her own footfalls ghosting softer than they would have a year ago. She'd learned a lot since then. Too much, maybe. Somewhere ahead, a bird-like creature let out a short, staccato cry before going silent. A branch swayed high above, scattering light through the canopy. Marin scanned left to right, saw nothing but shifting green, and kept moving. Behind her, Greer's presence was a steady constant, just outside her peripheral vision. Not a weight, not a tether, just the quiet reassurance that if anything broke this hush, she wouldn't be alone when it did. The weight of instinct. They moved under the thinning canopy with the discipline of seasoned hunters, the line shifting in perfect silence over the uneven ground. The forest was dense here, shadows pooling between heavy roots and undergrowth. Each footfall was deliberate, controlled. Not a word passed between them, only hand signs, the occasional flicker of helmet lights catching on bark. To anyone watching, it would look routine. Another insertion, another approach, nothing amiss. But Greer's posture told a different story. He was... Oops. Hold on. Do that to me in the middle of me reading. Hold on. Oh boy. No. I wasn't reading and something loaded. Hold on. Okay. Okay. There we go. But Greer's posture told a different story. He was calm, always calm. Rifle low, shoulders loose, boots kissing the earth without sound. Nothing about his movement betrayed tension, yet Marin felt it. The slight, near-invisible way he was never more than a step or two behind her, never drifting too far to either side, always where he could close a gap, interpose, react. The man was a shadow, but not her shadow alone. Every so often his visor ticked toward the column ahead, small a shift in weight, a tilt of his head that said he was counting more than just their spacing. He was watching every Marine, every rifle barrel, every casual glance. Not with a suspicion he could name, not yet, but with that bone-deep instinct of a soldier who'd walked into enough traps to know the signs before they ever surfaced. Marin kept her own senses wound tight and quiet, the barest ripple of awareness brushing across her squad mates, the surrounding trees, the small lives flitting through the branches above. No hostility, no ambush waiting in the underbrush. Quiet was just quiet. But beneath it there was a wrongness she couldn't place. It was subtle, a thread pulled too tight. It reminded her of Bastine just before the cell door had opened for the first time. That same strange stillness, like something was off but refused to show itself until it was too late. IT raised a hand, signaling a brief halt. The Marine shifted into cover without sound. Byrne knelt just behind Marin's left flank, casual as anything, checking the feed on his rifle, but his head tilted just enough to scan the column again, methodical and slow. If anyone else noticed, they'd chalk it up to routine perimeter vigilance. Marin knew better. She brushed her thumb over the stone Jared had given her, feeling the carved names like an anchor in her palm. No report could be made. Not yet. Not with nothing solid. But Greer's instincts weren't something she ignored. If he was watchful, then the exercise wasn't the only thing being tested out here. When IT's hand cut forward and the column flowed on, Marin matched his pace, keeping her own senses threaded through the team. She wasn't probing. Not enough to set off alarms among the Force-sensitive. Just a quiet weave of presence, a line between herself and Greer. Whatever lay ahead, whatever shadow of betrayal they were unknowingly walking alongside, it wasn't going to catch them unaware. Not this time. And that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 3. And I'm going to leave you there on that slight precipice of cliffhanger until next time, because that's how this works. Alright, my friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening. I do hope that you enjoyed the story. I apologize again for the tech issues. I'm still sorting those out. Still figuring out how the prompter works, so hopefully I can get that sorted. I do hope to see you all on my next stream, which will be next Wednesday. If you're into gaming, I'll be playing a little bit of SWTOR. And then my next stream after that is going to be wait one sec, I can actually tell you. I'll give you a date. So yes. Yes, I will be streaming Star Wars The Old Republic on Wednesday, October 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then my next stream after that is Sunday, October 19th, also at 7 p.m., where I will be doing a writing workshop. I will probably be doing some chapter polishing for Steps into the Past. Probably for the chapters I'll be reading the following Wednesday. So, hope to see you all on the next stream. And even if you're just hanging around for the story, like, that's cool too. I'm okay with that. I hope you are enjoying the story, because I have enjoyed writing it. So I'm hoping that you're enjoying it as much as I am. I am going to... You know what? I'm actually going to call it here. Usually I will raid out, but it's later than normal. So I'm actually going to just call it here for the night. I hope you all have a good rest of your evening. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your week and can have a good weekend. Hopefully a quiet one. Take some time for yourself. Do some self-care. It's also always important to give yourself some time to unwind. And that's different for everybody. So I hope you take the opportunity to do that and do a little bit of self-care. Have an awesome night, my friends. Take care of yourselves. Do all the things. Drink the water. Take the meds. Get some good rest. Have a good night, my friends. Bye-bye.